Remind everybody that the meeting is being broadcast and recorded. So the first order of business this evening is a consent agenda, which includes town accountant warrants, minutes from September 20th and 26th, as well as October 31st, gift acceptance, Alcott School, PTG, $1,000 to the Concord Recreational Scholarship gift account, one-day special licenses, wine and malt for Saltbox Farm at 40 Westford Road on the 10th of January, the 4th, 14th, and 17th of February, and the Concord Art Association at 36 Lexington Road on January 28th.
I move to accept the consent agenda as read.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is Executive Committee minutes of December the 12th. And I would entertain a motion to approve them, not to be released.
Move to approve the executive session minutes of December 12th, not to be released.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Whalen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a few things to report. I want to thank the Public Works Department staff for the efforts over the weekend to clear the roads. It was challenging because it was so cold, so the salt doesn't work quite as well when it's below 20 degrees, so they did have to scrape a couple of times in order to get everything off the roads. The proponents of Junction Village have requested a waiver of application fees and permits. The board requested that when there's a significant request for a waiver, that be reviewed by the board. So that's on your agenda for 2 weeks from now, on the 23rd, to consider Junction Village request for a waiver of fees. Also related to Junction Village, the planning board is hearing, discussing their recommendations for the Board of Appeals tomorrow night. That's Tuesday, January 10th at 7 p.m. at 141 Kais Road to make a recommendation to the Board of Appeals on the comprehensive permit application for Junction Village. We had fire in the fire station, Station 2. Luckily, no one was hurt. It got quite hot. The fire got going quite well. Our insurance adjuster estimated there was about $2.5 million in damage to the West Concord Fire Station. It'll take 4 to 6 months to get a contractor in there to make the repairs. The staff is currently working out of the light plant warehouse, which is partially heated, and there's a space in there, living space in there as well. So then the light plant has said they can stay as long as that works for them. And so for the last few days, it's worked well. So I don't know if they'll stay there permanently, but or meaning for the next 6 months or so. But it's working.
The light plant has places for them to stay?
Yeah, there's a mezzanine area that's heated, so that's where they stay, and the warehouse is somewhat heated. It keeps the vehicles warm enough so that they operate effectively. So it does seem to be working.
Any anticipation as to how much of the damage will be covered by insurance?
It appears that it all but the deductible. So because of the umbrella coverage, so both for the vehicle, which was a total loss of about $550,000, and then the building damage should be fully covered. And the state fire marshal towed the fire engine away to have it examined to determine what the cause of the fire was. We still don't know what it is. That investigation is ongoing. And our insurance company did talk about subrogating against.
And I noticed that there were some items that exploded.
The oxygen or the air bottles, the SCBA bottles that they use to go into smoky buildings.
Are they in a secure facility?
They were in a rack, but the helmets melted. The entire first floor got extremely hot. Melted the carpet on the second floor. Yeah. Got that hot, and melted all the wiring and damaged the HVAC systems. So we're, again, fortunate the 3 firefighters that were there got out. The rec department has set up a skating rink at Emerson Field, and it was in operation over the weekend, and as long as it stays cold, they'll continue to provide that. The citizen survey, the raw data came out about a month ago. The finance department has done some analysis and will release the analysis and that data later this week in a report, as they usually do. We do the citizen survey every 2 years. The house at 91 Sudbury Road was removed. I want to thank the Rod Robinson and the Public Works staff, as well as the police department, fire department, the building commissioner's office for the help taking that down. It was unfortunate to see the building removed, but I think it was in the interest of public safety.
I don't think it was unfortunate. I'm glad to see it removed.
Yeah.
I must say it was pleasant that it was pretty quick removal.
Yeah. Yeah, and the site was left in good shape.
Really nice job.
Nice job of grading.
Yeah, saving the tree.
And,
Lots of trees.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just two other items. Our Nagog Pond water treatment facility will be the subject of the Board of Selectmen's hearing in Acton next Wednesday, I believe, is January 18th at 7 p.m. in the Acton Town Hall. And then this morning, we met with the representatives from US EPA to discuss possible town acquisition of this property at 2229 Main Street, the former StarMet site, and under what conditions. EPA hopes that the town will acquire the property that will speed the process of remediating the contamination. But there's a lot more dialogue to take place relative to that. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Complicated. Is there other questions for the town manager?
I don't really have a question, but I just would add that you sent us notice that the town received the award for the budget booklet, which I think is very impressive, and the people associated with that should be thanked very much.
Thank you, Tom.
And
That's good. The
also,
finance
I thought it
department.
was terrific that the public library was able to get in auction the manuscripts from Louise May Alcott. So that was pretty exciting.
Thank you.
All right. Next item is a proclamation, and as some of you may know, that's my wife, so I will gently remove myself from the conversation and voting. Jane?
Yes. I move that we approve the proclamation of Ms. Nancy Nelson, Superintendent of the Minuteman National Historic Park, which I believe will be delivered to her at the occasion of her official retirement, and as written.
Second.
Do we want to read that aloud? So people
I am
can
happy to
hear
read
it?
it out loud. I was not,
If you don't mind?
no,
'Cause
absolutely.
Many people may not hear it otherwise.
Okay. Proclamation honoring Ms. Nancy Nelson, Superintendent of Minuteman National Historic Park, upon her retirement after 39 years of public service. Whereas Nancy Nelson began her career for the National Park Service in 1978, and whereas Ms. Nelson has played an active role in many regional park restoration projects throughout her tenure as a park planner and landscape architect, including successful rehabilitation and restoration of the Statue of Liberty. And whereas Ms. Nelson assumed her position as superintendent of Minuteman National Historic Park in 1983, where she worked tirelessly to strengthen the park's community relationships and to preserve key park resources. And whereas Ms. Nelson has proven to be an accomplished leader in the field of park management, as evidenced by her extraordinary efforts related to the successful completion of the award-winning Battle Road Interpretive Trail, as well as her many achievements related to landscape rehabilitation and historic structure preservation. And whereas Ms. Nelson organized and led the expansion campaigns related to the revitalization of the Minuteman Visitor Center in Lexington and advancements related to local Patriots Day events within the park systems. And whereas Ms. Nelson sponsored a major archaeological initiative relating to the April 19th, 1775 Battle of Parker's Revenge. And whereas Ms. Nelson successfully partnered with several community boards and committees and town officials to incorporate local historic buildings and parcels into the national park envelope. Now therefore be it proclaimed that the members of the Select Board of the Town of Concord, on behalf of the citizens of Concord, do hereby recognize Ms. Nancy Nelson's many contributions made for the citizens of the town and the visitors of the Minuteman National Historic Park during her successful career as park superintendent. We extend our personal best wishes in her well-deserved retirement and for her continued success in life's pursuits. Dated today.
I clapped under the table. So.
I was going to note that perhaps there was one recusal, but.
So did you get a vote?
So should we take a vote?
Sure.
Do I hear a motion?
We have a motion and it's been seconded.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. The next item is review and approval of a letter in support of Walden Woods project application to Massachusetts Cultural Facilities Fund for interpretive exhibits at Walden Pond. I was asked by Kathy Anderson, the director, if we would support her application. I checked with the town that there was no conflict in us doing that, so I would be happy to entertain a motion for the letter that we had in our packet to be sent.
I move to approve the letter in support of Walden Woods project application to Massachusetts Cultural Facilities Fund for interpretive exhibits at Walden Pond as drafted.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Well-written letter, thank you.
The next is the Concord Center Cultural District renewal. No, excuse me, it's final easement and escrow agreements to Brookside Square. So, is that,
Marcia here?
Marcia, are you going to talk to us about that?
That's the best microphone. That works.
Sorry to make you stand. Good evening.
Marcia Rasmussen, Director of Planning and Land Management for the town. Before you is a memo that I prepared outlining that there are a couple of documents, and I have several items on your agenda tonight, so just give me a minute. It's a memo with some pictures on the back. I think the pictures are more illustrative for where the easements are taking place. You'll find two graphics or pictures that show the Beharrell Street extension, Brookside Square. The top two pictures show the easement for the right-of-way. The picture on the lower left is of the recreation area and the walkway that has been constructed. And the drainage easement, the outfall is shown on Neshoba Brook. Both documents, one is an authorization for an escrow agreement.
So other people can see as well.
Is the escrow agreement to fund up to $50,000 for the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail to connect over the trail the West Concord commuter parking lot to the Beharrell Street extension, which would allow a second means of egress from the West Concord commuter parking lot, hopefully to alleviate some of the problems that we experience right on Commonwealth Ave when people get home and get in their cars and want to leave right away. That $50,000, if it is not used specifically for the trail, that funding can be used for additional funds for the bump outs that are proposed on Commonwealth Ave. That was part of the project, the mitigating pedestrian access for the development. And that's being coordinated with Concord Public Works. They're proposing a bump out at Concord Tea Cakes, and we are going to have the construction occur at the same time, hopefully in the summer of 2017. And that authorization is for the town manager and the director of finance to sign the escrow agreement. The second one is the easement over the right-of-way, allowing public access. Brookside Square will be responsible for the maintenance, the ongoing maintenance and repair of that right-of-way, but the agreement extends rights to the Concord residents to use both the sidewalks and the roadway for their purposes.
All right. Thank you. Are there any questions from the board, Mr. Town Manager? Do you have any comments to make?
Just comment, it took quite a while to work out the details
Almost
of
2
these
years.
agreements, 2 years. But it's worthwhile because it creates a circular loop through Beharrell Street, and I think it's to the public's advantage.
And that loop roadway was a vision from the 1970s. There was a Junction Village Initiative plan that was prepared back in the 1970s with the business community and the town planner at the time, Mr. Kevin Hurley. So it took us that long to get to where we are today.
Wow.
It's great, though. It creates a really nice pathway all the way along. It connects the center of West Concord to the trails. It's really nice.
All right, well, we will deal with this in two specific parts. The first one, which I would entertain a motion, is the one that allows the town manager and the treasurer to execute the escrow agreement.
I move to approve and authorize the town manager and town treasurer to execute the escrow agreement by and between the town of Concord and Massachusetts Municipal Corporation, acting by and through the town treasurer or their designee, Brookside Square LLC, a Massachusetts limited liability company, and the town of Concord, acting by and through its town manager, in substantially the form presented to the board this evening.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Looks great.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And second, to accept and endorse the easements. So I would entertain a motion for that as well. Excuse me? Oh, I'm sorry, Gordon.
I move
Is that
to
better?
I move to accept and endorse those certain permanent easements associated with the Brookside Square development located at 50, 70, and 80 Beharrell Street as follows. 1, right-of-way upon Beharrell Street extension. 2, grant of public access and recreation easement.
That's it.
That's it. That's it.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you, Marcia. Very good. Next on our agenda is the revised charge for the Polystyrene Outreach and Education Committee. I'll turn over to you, Alice. If
Okay.
you could walk us through this, that'd be great.
So, in response to the bylaw that was approved last spring at town meeting that banned polystyrene products in the food service, we created a committee whose charge was to develop the matrix for decision-making for the Board of Health in issuing waivers to that when they're not replaceable products. The committee has done that work. Chair has been Scott Richardson. Is he here tonight? I don't see him. He has done a really good job of chairing this committee, and they completed the tasks that they were assigned by this board. The hearing process is about to begin. We are expecting that we will receive some requests for waivers for certain products from a number of different a regulated community. And at the request of the committee, in agreement with the Board of Health and with Concord Public Works, they've asked that we extend the charge for another 6 months so that they can help in an advisory capacity in locating substitution products if they're needed, and to help in an advisory capacity on aspects of the waiver that should and could be met. So with the approval of both the Board of Health and the NCPW, I've redrafted the charge that changes their charge just minimally to reflect its new charge and extended it for 6 months. And so that's the decision of the board tonight.
Have they received any requests for delay in implementation from any particular?
We've heard from a few of the regulated community that they are having trouble finding 1 or 2 products. Sometimes coffee cup lids, straws seem to be a problem. And so we're expecting there to be waiver requests for some of the smaller items. Nothing's come in yet. We would hope to have them come in from now until March and begin the hearing process March, April, May.
Is the school system and hospitals, are they pretty well on board on all of this?
There will be some requests for waivers, particularly from the healthcare industry that has found it difficult for a number of their specialized uses for polystyrene, styrofoam uses in high infectious areas. There are just some concerns along the way, and we expect there to be some requests for waivers, but not a widespread request.
And
They're
it's a
refining replacement
one-year
products.
waiver?
It'll be a 1-year waiver that they need to
Can
reapply
that
for a
be,
second year.
if there's not a substitute, can that continue, or how does that?
So they would come back and apply each year for an extension of their current waiver, and the committee would keep on looking and be an advisory capacity if needed to figure out are there new substitution products on the market that make it feasible.
All right. Any
Well, the other, I guess, is the committee, this new committee that's being proposed. Is that, what stage is that now? Or do we have people who are going to be able to fill that, or?
So the request was that the current committee and its membership continue for 6 months.
That'll continue, and then the new committee will take over.
So the new committee is the same committee of people, but extends their charge for 6 months. They actually now have established a great deal of knowledge and have a great deal of materials that have been researched, so they are in the best position to be able to provide advice to the businesses that need help in coming into compliance.
willing to continue for the
They're all
additional
willing to
6 months?
continue. They've been meeting weekly. They now think they can probably meet
Every other.
monthly.
That's why they want the extension.
They've been very diligent.
Well, we
Great.
should be grateful.
Any other questions from the Board? All right, I'm happy to entertain a motion.
I move to amend the charge of the Polystyrene Outreach and Education Committee substantially as discussed, and to extend the committee's term to July 1, 2017.
Is there a second?
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank
Great,
you
thank
very
you.
much. All right. Next order of business is the review and, the review of the Estabrook Woods access, isn't it?
We haven't done the renewal of...
Oh, we did, we skipped, I'm sorry, I apologize. We skipped the Concord Center Cultural District renewal and West Concord Cultural District signage request. Marcia, welcome back.
Marcia Rasmussen, Director of Planning and Land Management.
Really? Close to the mic? Well, it's hard
Okay.
to...
Yeah.
Much better.
Okay.
So you have a memo before you. The Concord Center Cultural District has been in place for 5 years. That was the extent of the first round of cultural districts. We are eligible to renew our cultural district, and after meeting with Jane O'Baggy, the Executive Director of the Concord Chamber of Commerce, and the town staff, agreed that this was worthwhile. And so the memo before you outlines that we are in compliance with everything that needs to be in compliance and conformance for the Mass Cultural Council. To grant a renewal, all we need is your vote to send a letter indicating that we are interested. Town staff will follow up with the application process and attending the required meetings in February. And then that will be granted probably in June of this year. I don't have a draft letter prepared for you this evening, but I can prepare a letter with your authorization to do so.
Well, I do want to compliment, because we also brought West Concord in as a cultural district this
That was
year.
my
and-
second item, second part.
And so this is a lot. It's exciting.
I didn't realize that you had to reapply for the same status. Once you are a cultural district, every 4 years, you need to reapply?
Every 5 years.
Every 5 years?
Yes. They wanted to see how the program would work, see what funding might be available. They're bringing on more communities every year, designating cultural districts in different towns and cities. And so now they've reached a point where there are 10 communities that are eligible for this renewal. We are one of those 10.
Weren't we amongst the first?
We were
Right.
part of the first group.
Great.
Okay, so we'll I'd entertain a motion. Is there any questions you want to ask Marcia about this? I'd entertain a motion about renewal then.
I move to authorize the chair to sign and transmit a letter to the Massachusetts Cultural Council of the town's intent to renew the Concord Center Cultural District designation.
Is that a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, and then as Jane has pointed out, West Concord Junction Cultural District was approved just this past summer. And one of the requirements is to install 4 signs along, on the public way. So I need your authorization to have those 4 signs installed. Those locations have been identified as Commonwealth Ave opposite Kenneth Dunn Square, Commonwealth Ave near Beharrell Street, Main Street opposite the Fowler Library, and Main Street opposite Westgate Park intersection.
Is there a discussion of this before we entertain a motion? Yeah, I'd entertain a motion then.
So I move to approve the request for the West Concord Junction Cultural District signage at 4 locations indicated in the memo dated January 5th, 2017, from the Department of Planning and Land Management Director, Marcia Rasmussen.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, Marcia.
Thank you
Thanks,
very
Marcia.
much.
All right. Now we are at the review of the Estabrook Woods Access Study Committee report. So, here we are. This is, in my short few years on the board, an issue that has generated a lot of interest, and I'd want to thank again the committee. I see the chairs are both in the back, and I recognize a number of committee members in the audience. I want to thank them all again for the hard work they did in dealing with this issue. It's greatly appreciated. I'd like to thank also all the citizens who, these two binders here in front of you are the correspondence that we've received from citizens, quite a large number of them, plus any number of phone calls. So I'm really thankful to everybody for their willingness to participate and make sure we knew what's going on. For the property owners who are abutting these areas of access, grateful to you for the work you've done to keep some of the access in really great shape over the years. That's great. And I hope what we can do is go through these recommendations and try to arrive at a decision that is balanced and is best for the town of Concord. We're trying to balance a number of things. Access, ensuring people have access to these woods. On the other side, we want to make sure that, in fact, we don't damage the woods, that we can protect this very important, vital resource. We have to be mindful of people's property, and we also have to, of course, have very much in our mind the issue of public safety. And so all of those issues are, I think, germane to the way we will go through this process and try to arrive at decisions that will hopefully be in the best interest of the town. It is unlikely that we will be able to resolve all of the issues that we're contending with this evening. We'll do the best we can to get through what we can. I wanted to say at the outset, the cover letter from the committee, the study committee, indicated what they thought were the two most important recommendations of the committee. And they were resolving the uncertain legal status of the road from the end of the paved road, Nestoruk Woods, into the woods. It's a difference of a legal opinion between the landowners there and the town with respect to who has ownership of that land. That's something that our hope is that we will be able to, in some sense, try to avoid a legal confrontation. The town manager has talked with representatives from the abutters and will continue to do so to see if it's possible to reach an agreement of use of that property without giving up anybody's legal position. Whether that's possible or not, we'll have to see, but I think we should try and make every effort to get that done and avoid a legal issue. The second major recommendation, most important recommendation the committee made, was to speak with the trustees of reservation about the ability to create parking off Monument Street at Punkatasset. As you know, all of you, there is on-street parking now, which is, my words, nobody else's, seemingly to be dangerous. I mean, it's right on the road there, and it's not in a good location. So again, an issue of public safety. Two members of the board have met, along with the town manager, twice with representatives from the trustees of reservation. They have indicated a willingness to discuss with us creating some kind of parking there and some perhaps joint management relationship with respect to the Punkatasset area. That is an ongoing discussion. I don't know whether they have yet met with natural resources or not, but I think they're going to see if that process can go. I know they have told us that they have also hired a landscape architect, I believe, to deal with how the parking might actually look there. And we've indicated to them that we would greatly appreciate being involved when the landscape architect is ready to talk about that kind of parking. The major issue there, I think, that is evidenced in the reports that we've gotten have been how many spaces. And clearly, I think the safety issue of getting the parking off Monument Street is a good idea, but I think I have indicated, so I'll make it my personal statement, I have indicated that we're not interested in creating a large parking lot there. I think the issue is getting the cars off Monument Street and perhaps adding a modest number of spots there, but that's something that has to be worked through. So those two, is it my microphone or is there? Those two major recommendations that the committee made, that's the status of them. So those are ongoing, and we'll continue to pursue those in the hope of arriving at satisfactory resolution. For those of you that have read the report of the study committee, well, I tried that, and then they said they couldn't hear me.
Great.
Okay, can you hear in the back? Oh, can you hear in the back? Okay, just wave or something if I drift away. If you've read the report, it's extensive in the sense that it covers virtually everything that the committee could have taken up, it seems to me, and it's organized in a number of sections. And what my remarks that I'm making now are just as information as to how I think we would like to try to proceed through this report. So the first section of the report really deals with the issue of education and signage. It's a request or a recommendation here that we engage in educating people about the woods, that we make sure that we have appropriate information on our website, and we entertain appropriate signage to make sure people understand expectations about the woods. That's two. Other sections, for example, sections 5, 6, 7, and 8, all are specific sections that deal with issues around a particular access point, whether it's Estabrook Woods, Lowell Road, Chamberlain Woods, Monument Farm, or Punkatassett. So they are really contingent upon I didn't do it.
Nope.
Not my fault. Those are really contingent upon those particular access points. Section number 9 deals with essentially a recommendation to create some kind of ongoing entity to sort of look after the relationships of access in the woods, something like a Estabrook Woods Access Advisory Committee, but an ongoing committee that could deal with issues coming up. And 10 is essentially a short list of items that the committee considered and then decided not to take a perspective on. So having said all of that, there are two sections of the study report, sections 2 and section 4, which are in some sense the heart of the matter. And section 2 has to do with what I would call, they didn't, but what I would call use of the resource. When, how, who can, who can't, that kind of stuff. And section 4 deals essentially with the issue of parking. And it deals with parking at all of the various points. So my recommendation to us is that we should try to deal with the access issues and the parking issues to the extent we can. And then once these matters are resolved, I think it would be a relatively straightforward matter to go back and pick up, because I don't think there's really any controversy about, appropriate education. We have to have signage. We're certainly, it's a good idea to think about having an advisory committee, something like the West Concord Advisory Committee or the White Pond Advisory Committee that can provide that. So I think the area where there's going to be some issues for us to wrestle with are around the issues of use and around the issues of parking. So if that seems reasonable.
Absolutely.
To the audience, I will say that normally at a selectmen's meeting, what we would do is we would go through our agenda, and if you have a copy of the agenda, you would see that down at the end someplace, it says 12, item 12, it says public comment. But we have, on any number of occasions when an issue is of obvious concern to groups in the audience, we have not waited until the end of the meeting to entertain public comments. We won't do that this evening. Once we have had our discussion here, I'll want to entertain comments from the audience. But I'm going to ask for your help and cooperation on that when we get to it. And that is that we have received dozens and dozens of pieces of correspondence and phone calls and conversations on the street in town. I don't think we need to have them repeated. What we will be interested in hearing from tonight, I can't stop anybody from saying what you want, but that will be helpful to us is if there's comments about what we've talked about or any new relevant information that you have that we ought to have before we try to make some decisions here. So I would just ask for your indulgence when you think about making comments later on that you try to help us out by providing us with either thoughts about our conversations or new information that you think is germane to the committee, with the notion that we have read these pieces of correspondence and have had numerous conversations with folks. So I'll get back to that when we get there. So for the committee, it starts on page 2. The title of the section that I shorthand called use is foster observance of consistent guidelines that promote mutual respect. And all through all of these, there are lots of sign issues, and I think we'll just try to bundle those up when we know what it is we want to do. So I've talked already plenty. How would you like to proceed through these?
I would suggest we look at the access question first, because that was a major interest of the citizens as well as the board's discussion.
Could I just try, I think that he's got the sound up so loud, the amplification up so loud, I think your mics are picking one another up, so how about if we have the speaker turn your microphone on and everybody else turn your microphones off, and hopefully they won't pick up on one another?
Alice's won't go off.
Well, so we'll use mine.
So speak. You were speaking, so speak.
So I think that may be a good beginning. I know dogs are a controversial subject, as we remember from town meeting several years ago, that the discussion, I think we can begin by looking at access, which has been a very widely discussed and somewhat controversial at times concern. But I think that what's provided in this document is a pretty good set of recommendations and guidance for the board to decide, which are access from dawn to dusk only, parking allowed only in designated areas, no commercial activities, hunting. I have a question about swimming, camping, or fires, and no motorized vehicles. And I agree with all of my questions about swimming. Don't we allow swimming in the pond at Punkasasset?
No, people swim there, but
Really?
Nope.
Really? Really? I'm surprised. Every summer's day I've ever gone there are people swimming in the pond. All right. How do you enforce that, and why wouldn't we allow swimming? That's, I guess, the question. And maybe I'm the only one that's an outlier in thinking that the swimming in this nice pond would be an all right thing.
well, I think currently there is no swimming allowed, so.
Oh, you can hear.
Currently, there is no swimming allowed, so I think if we want to think about changing it, let's talk about changing it sometime next month or something.
Okay. All right.
All right, so one of the ways we could tackle this is under this, for those of you that don't have this recommendation in front of you, there are essentially 3 guideline areas that are articulated under Section 2A in their report. One is, as Alice has indicated, access, and she just read to you the access statements. The other is trail use, and the first is dogs permitted only as follows. So those are the 3 access or use kind of issues that are articulated in the recommendation. So, and you're suggesting that that the board could adopt the access one, so it's,
That would be my opinion.
okay. Well, let's,
I would also suggest the same for trail use if we want to move both together.
okay, and what, and you don't have the same feeling about dogs?
So my only question is the number of dogs per person. I know that this was a controversial conversation at town meeting, and we talked at length about whether 2 or 3 was the right number, that there are some families that have 3 dogs. But I understand that the concern is item number 4, which is commercial dog walking prohibited, and I would definitely approve, and I think that that's the right decision. But how do you tell a person who happens to own 3 dogs, or a family that has 3 dogs, versus a dog walker who may have 3 or more?
Well, a dog walker would be prohibited, and
Right, so,
And having sat through many, many, many Estabrook Woods Committee meetings, and once again, my hat's off to everybody because we met countless times, beginning at 7 a.m. And all of these points were discussed. If my memory serves me correctly, the 2 dogs per person was also about the ability to control a dog. And since the goal here was being able to, keep your dog under control on a leash, if you've got 3 very small dogs, that's one thing. If you've got 3 very large dogs who want to go in 3 different directions, that's a little harder. I confess I'm an owner of 2 golden retrievers, and sometimes I have a hard time with 2 of them, and they're quite docile. So,
Tom?
I felt that the 2-dog made sense, even though I often walk 3 dogs, but not there. But I do think control issue, and you got to cut it off at some level. So I felt all of these were really pretty reasonable and didn't have any problems. I don't know, the one issue that I had, the access from dawn to dusk, whether, I don't know how many people walk in the sort of late evening, but I think if you're working until 5:30, 6 o'clock, and you want to go walk your dog, there's a full moon out, I'm not sure if I would limit the timing on that, but I didn't part of the discussion on that. So.
My understanding, I'll ask Chris, my understanding is if you're thinking about town conservation land, that is the current
Policy
policy.
adopted by the Natural Resource
So
Commission.
it would be consistent with
The
that.
policy, okay.
Is that my correct?
Correct.
All right, well, how do you all feel about this?
And the only other point I'd make, then the no motorized vehicles, I think there's always the exception for the motorized wheelchairs. So, I don't know, again, how frequent that would be, but I know when the Committee on Disability on other issues, that always comes up, so.
So you would be suggesting to add a no motorized vehicle except for those
Correct.
associated with
is this for a person with limited physical mobility?
limited physical ability?
Not limited to a wheelchair, whatever the device is.
Yeah. All right, Jane, do you? Okay, well, we can do one or two things. We can go all in favor kind of stuff, or we could see if the public has any comments about this particular set of activities.
do we want to discuss trail use? Have we?
I think she
Yep.
said that was
Yep.
included, and I would support that.
Yep.
Jane asked about trail use. There are 3 items under trail use, and I'd indicated that Alice had said that those were also activities that she would support. So essentially, it's, the way I'm understanding this, it's all 3 of the what are called common courtesies or guidelines. Dogs permitted only as follows: access and trail use, with the exception that there would be a clause added for folks who had physical disabilities. Is that correct? So let me ask you then, would we be well advised to ask if there were any public comments about
I would
this?
think that makes sense, yes.
Okay. So just with respect to this, these three items right here, Neil, if you just hit the microphone, please. And identify yourself for the record.
Neil Rasmussen, 393 Estabrook Road. As you know, the town only owns about 8% of the Estabrook Woods. So any rules like this adopted across the woods really require the different owners to adopt them. I've talked to a lot of the owners, and shared with them these, and I think a lot of the owners are thinking they'd like to adopt a uniform set of rules, and these are looking pretty good.
Good. Well, let me, since you've raised that issue, I'll complicate it further. For example, the Chamberlain Woods is controlled by the Concord Land Trust, and Punkatassett and Monument are controlled by the Conservation Commission. So the reality is what we would be doing here would be encouraging the common adoption of these sets of rules to apply to all of the access points, and they would require that the Land Trust would go along with it, that the Conservation Commission would go along with it. So I think that would be. If you're going to speak, you got to go.
Susanna K. Reed, 366 Estabrook, cross street from Neil. I'm not clear. I understand you're saying that you can require the town and the Concord Land Conservation Trust, but you're recommending and encouraging owners?
I can't require the Conservation Commission or the Land Trust. What we can do is talk with them.
Understood.
As well as others who have a vested interest, and see if they would all adopt these common set of guidelines.
Appreciate
and that would be what we would be voting on here. Please come to the microphone.
Peter Gifford, 1171 Monument Street. I just need a clarification on, there was no commercial activity involved, but then I think you said something about permits for dogs. Did I
There is not. The articles in there, dogs must be on a leash from parking area to leash release signs, no more than 2 dogs per person. Dogs must be under the owner's control at all times, pack out all dog waste, and commercial dog walking is prohibited.
Okay, it must have been prohibited. I took as permitted.
All right, you go back and sit down.
Got lost
All right,
in
so I'm going to take a stab at what the motion would sound like. The motion is we would adopt these guidelines as recommended by the study committee and ask the town to engage in conversations with affected parties to seek the common adoption of these guidelines. That seemed like a reasonable motion. Is there a second? Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Thank you very much. I would also say within this same section now, there are a set of other activities that the town and the landowners work together. The town create tasteful signs. There's a whole host of other activities, but I think these are the real guidelines, and the rest of this then will follow, I think, directly from the action once we've met with the affected parties to come up with these. Includes, for example, in here, if you haven't seen it, that the police and animal control people would be working to make sure that these would. One of the points in there is that the police and animal control officers would work to encourage adherence to these kind of things. All right, good. Thank you very much. So if we
Mr. Chairman, if I just, the issue of packing all dog waste, is there going to be some way or location to dispose? And I notice sometimes people pack it and then sort of just dump it. And that doesn't...
And many hours were spent discussing that.
I would just hope that, I think these are all excellent but that issue get sort of further developed.
Well, clearly there is a lot that's going to have to get further developed that I am going to, for the sake of our conversation tonight, say that that would be part of the educational and signage effort that we would have to undertake to ensure that the actions that we're taking tonight can be effectively implemented and maintained, right? At least I'll try that, see if that works. Okay. The next is, in following along in this suggestion procedural suggestion, is addressing the parking issues. This is item number 4 in the study committee report. Item number A under parking issues is something I've already reported on, and that is encouraging the town to work with the trustees of reservation to determine the feasibility of providing low-key parking lot in what is known as the Apthorpe land. That conversation is underway. It's going to take a while to get that stuff figured out, but we're proceeding to try to do that. And I'm very mindful of the folks in the area who have written to us and talked with us that it simply can't be the case that we're moving this problem around. This is a matter of providing public safety and in protecting the woods. Those parking should be off Monument Street, but we can't be in the business of creating a huge parking lot to just drive more people into the woods from some other access point. Okay? All right, so that was item number A, that's on. The second is that the town permit and assist in providing roadside parking for 11 cars on Estabrook roads. That, as I understand it, is the current restriction that is in place. It's a temporary
I
restriction.
think there's 110 feet where parking has been designated, and that normally would, depending on how people park, should accommodate.
Size of cars and stuff like that. Okay. Then assuming a lot can be built on the trustees' Apthorpe land, the committee further recommends to post no parking on Monument Street at the entrance of Punkatasset to eliminate the off-street parking. And then the second is by, and I'll make this quite clear, a majority vote, keeping the no parking restrictions on the remaining of Estabrook Woods. You'll remember that the police had put in place temporary parking restrictions that are in effect for 60 days from the time we receive this report from the study committee, unless we make them permanent. At the number of cars would then total 11, and this was a vote of 7 members of the committee voted to approve that, and 2 members, if I'm reading correctly, voted to lift the parking restrictions. And then the third item under this area is to provide temporary parking on Estabrook Road while the planning is underway for the Apthorpe land. And my understanding of that is that the committee voted 5-4 not to lift the parking restrictions during this period. In other words, to not have any additional temporary parking on Estabrook Road while the Apthorpe land was being examined. Then the committee goes on to say if parking cannot be built on the Apthorpe land, then 2 actions are proposed. One unanimously, and that makes a great deal of sense, and that is that the town and NCR work to figure out a better way to have the parking that exists on Monument Street at Punkatasset so it's safer. That's the upshot of that. And then the second item there is by a majority vote, and again, this majority was 6 voting in favor of what I'm going to read to you, and 3 voting no. Even if no additional parking can be done at the Apthorpe area, there would be no additional parking beyond what is now proposed on Estabrook Road. I have that right? Okay. All right, so, how would you like to proceed through this? Do you have comments or thoughts about it?
I'll just make the comment that I sort of saw this whole thing as a sort of a conflict between access and usage of the woods by the public, which I generally encourage, because I think it gets people in favor of supporting that for both recreation and enjoyment, versus keeping it more as a natural preserve. And frankly, my mind has been changed by the amount of letters and support of keeping it more as a natural preserve. I felt that the letter from the Pippin Tree Land Trust was very persuasive. And I think where there are so many different parts to this, that it was originally really intended to be somewhat restricted. And therefore, I would sort of support the minority position of limiting the number of parking spaces.
I'm sympathetic to that. I would use slightly different words, though. I would talk about, rather than limiting, I'd talk about managing access. And I would also add to your statement the notion of safety. So that it is the managing access, to me, managing access, protecting the environment, and ensuring public safety. It's those three things
I would
that are
add,
mostly
I
on my
thought the
mind.
letter from the police chief, the fact that we got that was very helpful in my thinking as well.
Jane, I'll...
I think the recommendations are strong. I think that they're reasonable.
Jane? Punch your little magic button.
There we go. Again, as probably the person most intimate in all of the words written in this document, I'm also aware of all of the discussions that went into these votes, and am aware of the many intricacies behind them. I will say that one of the pressure points was, again, the intent of the woods, and the intent, whether it be for recreation or for preserving the natural landscape for study. The impact that we were dealing with was a relatively new impact, and that's what we're trying to manage. It has not been a historic inundation of the woods or historic parking problem. And one of the things that I found very exciting throughout the whole process was the number of different access points that I learned about in the process, separate of this particular vote. So that I just want us all to remember that we've discussed Chamberlain, we've discussed Punkatasset, we discussed the reason we all came to the room, which was the Estabrook Road point of concern. And we also discussed Monument Farms, all of which provide access. Not all of it is as readily usable, but those are all things that can be looked at into the future. So I'm comfortable with.
So you come out where?
In support of the committee I watched work through this.
Okay.
So that would be 11 cars as currently laid out on Estabrook Road, and 13 cars either on the Apthorpe land, or if that's not possible, along Monument Street. Is that the gist of these recommendations?
That is the 11 cars
Is
on
current.
Estabrook Road is recommendation 4B, right? So that's that one. And then we would go on and talk about the Apthorpe land. I don't think there's the 13 cars that might be possible at Punkatasset, but the question of how many spots would be in the Apthorpe land is not ours unilaterally to
Okay.
make. It's the trustees' reservation land's not ours, and we hopefully work with them to get a satisfactory resolution of that. Okay. So I think all we can do is on item number A, which is encouraging the town to meet with the trustees. We've already indicated that process is underway, so I don't think there's any action that has to be taken there. If that should fall apart, I think we could come back and revisit something in the future, but until it does, I think we should try to see if we can work with the trustees to come up with some recommendations. So I guess my point is, B, 4B sounds like something we could act on, which is that the town permit and assist in providing roadside parallel parking for 11 cars on Estabrook roads. Note, this is a number of spaces currently permitted with parking restrictions in effect, and that's a recommendation of the committee.
So my only question on that recommendation is, I think I heard Chris say that there's 110 feet available for parking. Oh,
Hold on.
I stand corrected.
Well, by who?
If the property, I think it's a challenge for the police department. If the rule is 11 cars, again, they can park at different distances, and it can extend to block neighbors' driveways and so forth. So I think it would be better to identify a distance,
That's what I
rather,
was
whatever the
getting at.
distance might be, rather than
That's what I was trying
a
to get
number
at.
of cars.
cars vary in size.
Yes.
Neil Rasmussen, again, Estabrook Road. So the police, the engineering department, and we as a committee also measured it. It's at 212 feet, and the police used a number of 19 feet per car. You can kind of do the math. That's where the 11 comes from, and that's what we observed there. So I just wanted to clarify, in case you were wondering, it doesn't sound very long, 110 feet.
So that's helpful, but I think the distance is more helpful for the police
it's how
than the
many
number of
feet?
vehicles.
212 feet. I would feel more comfortable showing that you're parking within this 212-foot zone. If you happen to have a lot of smart cars, or if you happen to have a lot of limos, you're going to get a different number of vehicles in there. But not to exceed the parking areas that have noted at 212 feet.
All right, so I'm going to suggest, before we get your comment, but I'm going to suggest then that 4B be amended in the text here to provide roadside parallel parking for a distance of 212 feet.
Oh, along Estabrook Road, yep.
Okay, yes, ma'am.
I'm Abby White from 851 Monument Street, which is the access, the property abutting the Punkatassett access.
Right.
So I'm wondering if there would be the same rule of thumb to be, as far as distance, used at Monument Street, because if in fact you're measuring feet, I don't believe the 13 cars. It depends whether you consider a parking space with a car fully parked off the road, but with tires fully parked off the road, there's not the distance to park 13 cars at Monument Street. And I do applaud the committee for the work they did, but regardless of any work, we did some work there. One was a deeded access to the road that has been used as a parking space. The rest of it, however you slice it, if you do it by feet, it would seem the equivalent of what you're talking about on Estabrook Road. And I don't believe you get 13 cars there as a base.
So I think it would make sense for us to know the length of available parking areas that can be safely parked on Monument Street and apply the same language for the Monument Street parking.
Okay, so that would be if we use the information we just had, that would be a distance. If we're going to accommodate 13 cars using the same distance as Estabrook, that would be 247 feet.
Just pulling from memory, and if one of the committee members has a better sense of this, please help us. I don't remember the 13 cars being along Monument Street.
What do you mean?
into Punkatassett.
Hold on,
Yeah,
please. Just-
Lisa Pohl, 75 Laurel Street. And yeah, I was on the subcommittee for parking for Monument Street. And yeah, it started off as 13 cars. It diminished significantly because of the new residents there cutting in parking, going in and out. Also, they put up sign. I don't know. It has diminished to it no more than 9 at this time. But I was stepping forward. So obviously the parking on Monument Street has diminished, but I was stepping forward because the parking on Estabrook Road as 11 cars as designated by our committee. I was on the committee for the access to Estabrook Road. Estabrook Woods. I was there this past weekend, and I was among 9 other very small cars. We were parked haphazardly, admittedly, but we took up all the space. So it would have to be the parking on Estabrook Road would have to, the area going into the Dinah Buchner-Vishner's area would have to be, made accommodate for parking there. And it would, I don't know how you would do it, but it would have to be that it would accommodate 11 cars. Because if it doesn't accommodate at least 11 cars, then it's really not is substantial. In addition to that, we're talking about access to the woods, and I understand your concern about making it not getting the public, making it a big park, but we're basically just trying to restore the parking that was there prior to this whole issue. 2 years ago, we had it was a record snowstorm, major issues throughout the, so the police are responding to issues that were, came to them at that time, okay? All of the Northeast had those issues. But prior to that, there was unlimited parking on Estabrook Road. There weren't, so my hope is that we can, aid, town residents and the public to enjoy this amazing, amazing, beautiful resource that we have. And
Thank you.
Welcome and be
Thank you. Okay, so
So I think we heard that there's certainly dispute over whether or not the 13 is
Is
we're going to have to
feasible.
come up with a different way of measuring.
Chris, would it be possible for, just do 1 second, Kathy, so I won't, do you think it would be possible to, within a relatively short period of time, get the Public Works people out there to actually measure and give us a clear statement of how many cars they could accommodate
On Monument Street?
on Monument Street, so that we would have a definitive, okay.
Given the new curb cuts and...
Holly?
I just wanted to say that in the committee's file, there's a lot of work that the Department of Public Works has actually done to measure and to document what was there at least a particular point in the summer. So
it probably already is done, and
it
we just need to get our hands on it?
Yep.
Okay, fine, thank you.
Great, thanks.
Eric or Kathy, I don't know.
Are you ready for comments?
What are you going to comment on? If you're going to talk about parking at Estabrook or parking at Punkatassett? Yeah, Estabrook or Punkatassett.
Okay. So
Take your,
what's the real problem here that we're trying to address at the Estabrook Road end of the Estabrook Woods? Reading all the reports of the committee, it seems to me it's 90% dogs and 90% dog walking, and 10% people uncivil or ill-informed or rude. And it seems to me we've come up with an excellent series of recommendations to address the dog problem. And I think we ought to try those out, because I think we should be working together, everybody in town with the neighborhood, to solve the problem, to fix the problem. I think we can do that with these recommendations. I think we can address some of the other problems with particular specific recommendations. If it's a problem with people turning their cars around in neighbors' driveways, you can fix that with the turnaround and proper signage, which has been done. Today, I refreshed my soul and celebrated my physical well-being by taking a magical ski through those woods from the Estabrook Roads and to Carlisle and back. When I pulled into the parking at the end of the road at 12:35 p.m. on a splendid day after a snowstorm, there were no cars parked there, none. When I came out of the woods, there were 3. I saw 3 people and 1 dog in the entire way. No problem, no impact on the resource. As a matter of fact, I haven't really heard of an impact on the resource that we need really to be concerned about. And if we're talking about taking some parking spaces that have historically, customarily, and traditionally been on Estabrook Road, it's not 11. We've had 15 to 20 parking there as long as I've lived in town for 30 years, not 11, okay? All we're going to do is move them from one neighborhood to the other. For what reason? We're not solving the actual problems. I think we're responding to the aesthetic concerns of a neighborhood. And I don't think that outweighs the right of public access to this treasure. We all treasure the resource. Nobody wants to do anything to threaten it. But we're not talking about protecting the resource if we take the cars down to 11, which on maybe a dozen days a year or 24 days a year will have real bite, real impact on the access. What you're talking about is shuffling them around. If you do this, it creates a terrible precedent. It is capitulation to a classic NIMBY problem for no real reason. We can solve this problem without establishing that precedent, because if you establish that precedent, what is there to stop the neighbors on my street, Devon Street, from putting boulders down along the side of the road? We have no sidewalks. And on Patriots' Day, or when there's a play at Thoreau Street, or if there's an Emerson Umbrella Fair, our street is clogged with cars parked there. We have to look at them. What's more, our guests can't park in front of our house. So the argument for restricting parking there, I propose, is stronger than the one at Estabrook Road. We're annoyed by that, but we live with that. That's not the problem. Let's solve the problem together by doing the specific things with the least restrictive means. If we cut down and give in to this temporary reduction in parking, you're making bad policy, setting bad precedent, and capitulating on a NIMBY issue. Now, one other point. I've been told that threats were made to restrict access to the woods if we increase the number of parking spaces. I hope that's not true. I'd be sorry if it came to that. We should be solving the problems together rather than making threats. But a bit of history I came across is interesting. In 1932, 400 walkers from the British Workers' Sporting Federation conducted a mass trespass over the Duke of Devonshire's lands to ensure access to Kinder Scout, the highest peak in that area. There was a tussle with the Duke's gamekeepers. 5 were arrested. But eventually, that walk, that Kinder mass trespass, led to the enactment of the England National Parks System. It led to the Preservation of Access to Open Lands Act of 2000. And today that walk is listed as one of 500 walks in a history of the world in 500 walks. Please do not unnecessarily restrict public access when you don't have to solve these problems which we can solve together, which we are about to do.
Thank you.
Last point is, there's a citizen's petition that will be on the warrant at town meeting this fall, declaring that for the town of Concord, maintaining and expanding public access is a high priority that should be considered by the board with regard to anything they may do. At the very least, I don't think you should do anything at this point in time that would permanently restrict customary public access with parking at this place until town meeting has a chance to express its view on this very important issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Neil Rasmussen. I was a member of the Estabrook Access Committee, and I support its findings. I'm here speaking as an owner and a steward of the second largest tract of land in Estabrook Woods. We are landowners asking for your help. The Estabrook Woods became protected in 1966 as the result of actions of a few Concord families, Middlesex School, and Harvard. Concord families protected or contributed land under the condition specifically that it would be forever preserved as a wildlife and nature preserve. For 50 years, the landowners, the town, the land trust, and our citizens have united behind this goal and vision. And in 1996, under the leadership of Marion Thornton, we all recommitted to this vision in the Campaign for Estabrook Woods, which placed an additional 400 acres into conservation. And we're never done. In the last year, I was privileged to participate in the protection of 28 acres of the Estabrook Woods in Carlisle, and I also led the protection of 5 acres next to Chamberlain Woods. It's a tremendous continuing success story. So it's with great sadness that I tell you that we're losing this great place as it's under pressure to become a regional dog park. The change occurred suddenly at the end of about 2014. Nobody's to blame for it. It just happened as a result of internet promotions and other locations in Concord and surrounding towns restricting access to dogs. At the entrance to Estabrook Road, we had an insignificant number of dogs per day for about 48 years. And suddenly, and I've given you the data, it's 20,000 dogs per year passing that access. Who knows what it would have been if the restrictions, the parking restrictions that the police put in hadn't been installed. Some of those dogs are quietly walking with the owner, on the owner's leashes. Some are running around loose in the woods with cowbells on. Some are running around barking their brains out. Some are running around in packs threatening wildlife and visitors. And almost all of these dogs are defecating and urinating, especially at the entrances. At my property, we needed to dig up a large amount of topsoil and dispose of it as hazardous waste. Despite the best efforts of our committee, you can see from the letters and public comments that many people believe that Estabrook Woods is a public dog park. People come from Lexington, Lowell, Andover, and other distant towns to use it as a dog park. The most common question we get on Estabrook Road is, where is the dog park? It seems people are forgetting that the Estabrook Woods in Concord is mainly private land with 6 major landowners who are Harvard, with about 600 acres in Concord, my family with 200 acres, and 4 owners each with about 100 acres who are the town, the land trust, Middlesex School, and the Robb family. Of this land, only 30% has a deeded public access. Access on the remaining 70% is by permission only. The Select Board has received correspondence from the property owners of over 70% of the land in Estabrook Woods, including Harvard, who have expressed to you their concern that the volume of use as a dog park is threatening the wildlife and conservation goals they have for their property. The Select Board also received a petition from many citizens expressing their concern that preservation mission of the land was threatened by overuse. The report of the Access Committee specifically states that the woods are not a dog park and recommends awareness of it and its ownership mission be communicated to the public. I'd like to point out that most conservation preserves established for wildlife protection specifically do not even allow dogs. I hope we can agree it would be unfortunate if it came to that in Estabrook, but there may be no alternative if we really are committed to wildlife preservation. It's dismaying to me to see a conflict between people who are trying to protect the woods and those who view it as a regional dog park. Those of us who are trying to protect the woods know we are greatly outnumbered by the tens of thousands of dog owners in the region who are looking for a place to let their dog run wild. So we need your help. The property owners can establish use restrictions on their lands and will reluctantly do so if it's necessary to protect them and their wildlife and the mission they've established for them. But a better solution is for the town to manage the access volumes and establish rules, as you've been talking about tonight, which is basically what the committee recommendation is trying to do, and possibly provide parking preferences for Concord residents if there's an ongoing problem with people being able to get in where they want to get in. Please help us continue the 50-year success of Estabrook as a wildlife and nature preserve. It's the expressed wish of the owners of the property in there, and I hope you share my belief that we owe it to the great men and women who've worked over the years to protect this special place.
My turn now. My name is Catherine Angel. I was also on the Estabrook Woods Access Study Committee, and I live at 267 Main Street. And I want to follow up and respond to comments that a few people made, Lisa, Eric, Neil, and hopefully combine some of them in a way that I hope will be helpful to you as you decide how to vote on the recommendations. Since Neil went last, maybe I'll start with that. I agree that the idea of Estabrook Woods becoming a regional dog park is not something that I want to see, or that I think most people in Concord want to see. When we were having the public hearing, one day I was handing out the notices that were on our the town's website about the meeting, and would ask people as they came into the woods at Punkatasset or at Estabrook where they were from and did they know about the meeting, et cetera. A large number of them were in fact from out of town. A large number of people who had dogs were in fact from out of town, and I have no doubt that part of that is because a number of other places do restrict dog walking in their public natural spaces. One of the things that you should have in your documents is actually sort of a progressive dog restriction plan that I wrote up for the committee at one point that incorporated increasing levels of managing dogs coming into the woods. I think what we have in the recommendations is the most minimal level, because all it does is restrict the number of dogs. There are other things that are in that progressive plan that include limiting any dogs, prohibiting any dogs coming in at certain times, such as on weekends, or saying that dogs have to be unleashed throughout the woods. Obviously, the most extreme would be saying no dogs, and for a lot of reasons, the committee was reluctant to move to that, but I think proposing, or for the select board to adopt some sort of progressive plan to see if that helps with the dog management would be something that would make sense, because I think until the plan, that the recommendations that you've just talked about for dogs are put in place and all the signs are put up, there's no way to know how the dog use will actually go in the woods, whether word will go out that, gee, you can't have more than 2 dogs, or you have to keep them leashed to begin with. So I think until we try that, we don't know how it's going to work. And that leads to one of my second points, which is I think that because there has been so much effort put into these plans, and there are a number of proposals in there, and yet they have not been implemented. They have not been adopted by all the landowners. The signs are up. To the best of my knowledge, at this point, there is still no sign in the parking area that says to leash your dog there. So we don't know how the compliance would be with people leashing your dog starting on Estabrook Road right when you get out of the car. So until we have those in place, I don't know how we can make, or the town can make, any final decision about how many parking spaces there should be on a permanent basis. So at a minimum, I would suggest that these guidelines and the signs and all should be put in place, should be given a chance to work, and then final decisions could be made on the number of spaces. In the meantime, I share Lisa's and Eric's and other people's concerns that what we have right now, particularly with the fact that there were curb cuts put in at Punkatasset, is that we have the lowest number of spaces that we have ever had available throughout any of this for people to access Estabrook Woods. Particularly, as Lisa said, at times not everybody parks perfectly, so with that number, we have even fewer spaces than what the committee has sort of tried to recommend. So I think that until the Punkatasset lot is built, I would urge the committee to really look at putting in some temporary parking. There are reasonable spaces on Estabrook Road that would still provide for public safety, that would not create runoff issues and various other things that Public Works has looked at and the committee discussed at times. So I urge the committee to take another look at that. In terms of preserving the woods as a whole and wanting it to be a nature preserve, I value that as much as anyone here, I think. I never heard any discussion at any time in the committee that the woods at this point are actually in any way being degraded from the public walking use that occurs in the woods. The only degradation that I think really came up at one point was some discussion about bikes if they're in sensitive areas, and so we addressed that in the guidelines by saying that bikes shouldn't be there. To the extent that the dogs are really the problem, that's a problem with the dogs running off the trail in the leaf litter and various other things. Again, that's a dog issue, not a people issue. And I would argue that the restricting the parking and limiting the people going in as a way to deal with the dogs is using the wrong tool for the problem. I don't own a dog. I've never owned a dog. I've owned cats. I don't walk my cats in the woods. I never did. And I think there are a lot of people that you saw in your letters, people feel that their ability to go and just take a walk in Estabrook Woods when they want is at this point effectively being limited by the fact that there are problems with dogs, and in particular the dog pressure has increased because of what other towns and locations have done. I'll try and wrap this up here, but I think one thing that needs to also be mentioned is that there was a vote that was taken by the committee, which I know you all have gotten letters about, but or gotten a copy of my email about that, but I encourage you to look at that and discuss that as well. And that was the situation which we don't have the lot at Punkatassett, that a majority of the committee did vote that we should then add more spaces on Estabrook Road. That was accidentally left out of revoting at our final meeting, so I would make the statement that that vote still stands, and that was a 6-3 vote to add more spaces back in on Estabrook Road. And because of the threat to have the access closed off on Estabrook Road, if the town adds even a single additional space back on Estabrook Road, there were people who ended up voting not to even recommend temporary parking because they were concerned about losing that access point. I would say, confirming what Eric said, that is basically allowing private decision-making to affect what the town's rights and responsibilities are with respect to parking on its roads, and that temporary parking should certainly be something that the town should be able to put back in, and particularly if there's a delay on the Punkatassett, that the town needs to consider that.
Thank you. All right, so the two parking matters that are before us are section 4B, which is the 212-foot amended part of the report replacing 11 cars, and D1, which is the 13 cars at Punkatassett. The third recommendation down that we had not discussed is that the Natural Resources Commission, Chris, would undertake consultation with the neighbors up in the Monument Farm area to determine best location for 3 to 5 cars on town frontage on Monument Road, abutting the conservation land. So those are the three Did I miss one, or what?
Chamberlain is not.
Well, that's right, because the Chamberlain, the recommendations with respect to Chamberlain Woods fall under that part of the report, sections 5, 6, 7, and 8, which are specific to things that could be done in each of those access points to make it safer or better, as opposed to how many, right? So I think section 4 essentially is a how many section. And then 5, 6, 7, and 8 talk about grading and plowing. I mean, important issues, but I think my perspective on this is let's try to see if we can arrive at decision about spaces. And then we can go back through the various sections of the access points and try to deal with the other sort of issues. I'm happy to be moved elsewhere, but I'm happy, but.
Process.
And I would just add that I know, Tom, you had mentioned it, but we do also have a note from the chief of police indicating his agreement with this in the interest of safety on that road. So I think that's important to note here. So where are you on? I guess we've got 3, Estabrook, Punkatassett, and Monument Farm. And where are you?
I definitely hear the comment about providing adequate access and that parking is only a part of a solution for the number of dogs and misbehaving dogs, or misbehaving owners and dogs. I'm just working through my own thoughts about, there are some really good comments that we heard both from Eric and from Kathy that resonate with my thinking about how do we provide for public access without incurring poor dog behavior and poor people behavior. And the parking isn't necessarily the solution. I have to assume that the committee worked long and hard to come up with the 212 feet and worked with the town. I think we had talked early on about possibly extending parking along Estabrook Road a further distance, and it got in the way of some wetland areas that made it more difficult to permit additional parking. I think we had all agreed a while ago that parking on just one side of the road was advantageous. It allowed for easier turnaround parking. It allowed for the public access to be provided for emergency vehicles and other things that happen. And I don't think there's disagreement among this board, at least I haven't heard it in other meetings, about changing parking to 2 sides. So the question is, the parking along 212 feet. I'm wondering if we have to make a decision tonight to something that is a permanent decision. We've now worked in an operating mode for a year with temporary parking restrictions while the committee did its work. I don't want to say we shouldn't be making a decision, but I want to make sure that we understand the balance for public access once we control the dogs with the good language and enforcement of dog behavior, whether that speaks to a lot of the concerns that have already been resolved with people managing their animals and reducing the commercial dog walking.
Sharon?
Kicking the can down that road is what I say, to see whether dog restrictions help the situation without impacting neighbors.
Right. I am also cognizant of the number, because one of the things we've talked about between Punkatassett and Estabrook is the number of cars historically. I've heard it stated that we're at the lowest number of accessible parking spots at this point into the woods as we have had. I don't have the good fortune to personally know that one way or the other, but I'll take it on faith and say that we also haven't established what we can or cannot do, what we will or will not be interested in doing at the Apthorpe property, and that's another reason to maintain temporary while we look at dogs, while we look at the options in front of us. I don't know that there is a there are still a lot of things being looked at right now. I'm not sure that we need to make that decision tonight. So.
I generally like to go ahead and make a decision.
I would just remind us again that I'm sympathetic to the concern of not totally convoluting. But I am mindful that there is also a safety issue. This is a narrow country road. The chief of police has weighed in and indicated that he does not believe that any more parking spots should be put there. His concern isn't dogs, and his concern, his concern is public safety. And I have a strong interest in public safety, both on Estabrook Road and on Monument Street. I think there are significant public safety issues there. I don't know what's going to happen in terms of access when you limit the dog thing. Hopefully it'll help the problem. But I still am concerned. The road is a narrow country road. The police has indicated his belief that it's a safety issue. And I think the same is true for the parking on Monument Road. That's why I'm very interested in continuing our conversations with the trustees to see if we can resolve this. I think it's important to get it resolved. That's a dangerous situation. So from my point of view, I'm not making this as an attempt to try as much limit access or protect somebody's backyard as I am making on the basis of public safety, and supported by the recommendations of the Access Committee and by the Chief of Police. And so I guess I'm with Tom that I'd like to see us go ahead and make a decision about it. I would say that if we cannot affect an off-street parking on the Apthorpe land, if that somehow, and we must maintain some parking on Monument Street, hopefully we can do a better job and make it safer, I would be willing to come back and revisit the issue on Estabrook Road if we really can't do anything to affect parking there. But that would be the way I would want to look at this.
So in terms of sequencing the discussion, I would agree that I'd like to keep it open. So I'm wondering, are we making a decision tonight on Estabrook Road, absent a decision about the Apthorpe land, road improvements on Monument Street, and a discussion which could be quite robust at town meeting regarding public access to public lands, or access to conservation lands? All that would contribute to our general knowledge and decision-making about Estabrook Road, so that if we were to vote tonight to support 212 feet of parking along one side of Estabrook Road, to undo that, to allow additional parking along the same one side of the road would be a very high bar, should there have been considerable dialogue that persuades us or others in both town meeting and at the Apthorpe land.
But I think the public access issue, safety issue supersedes that. I mean, we're talking public access within the boundaries of safety. And if there's a concern about safety, I don't think the fact that, it's reasonable public access. And I think I'm perfectly comfortable saying that our vote, if we vote tonight, is not contradictory to the notion of public access. We're not cutting public access. We're dealing with parking issues. People can drop people off, they can get there, many other different ways. But we're talking about a parking issue. And so I think many have done it.
I'm looking at the votes. The committee was 5. Their votes were 5-4 on Apthorpe, 7-2 on whether 212 feet was sufficient. So the committee itself is not unanimous in its decision. And I think that's important to note. So I would never want to compromise the public safety of access to the homes that are on Estabrook Road. And I would think that parking on one side of Estabrook Road has shown to be a great improvement in public access, allowing for both turnaround and for police and fire trucks to be able to access the land if necessary. But I don't know, and I suppose we'd have to ask the question about, are there potential other areas on Estabrook Road that parking could be expanded further up the hill on one side that would have no impact on public safety? I don't know. But I feel like there are decisions, if we find that we can't do a parking lot on Apthorpe land, however minimal that is, we'd have to look at whether we can build the side of the road to adequate capacity to ensure the public safety along Monument Street. You know, there are a lot of what-ifs still.
So in
That makes me feel uncomfortable about permitting a permanent parking restriction on Estabrook Road with other variables still very much in play.
And if I'm hearing this correctly, what we're talking about is, again, 11 plus 13. It's a numbers concern. So if we don't have a path to the Apthorpe, whatever that ends up being, it's where do we find that?
Ma'am?
Yes, my name is Ellen Emerson. I live on Monument Street. I was not here, nor was my family here, at the time that the committee meeting had their hearings. And I am concerned that so much weight is being put to the committee hearings where there are 2 full binders of other citizens' comments, including our families. I think the key element here is balance. I think the Estabrook Road has had inordinate excessive use since my memories of it. My grandparents used to live where the Rasmussens live now. It was never a problem until recently, and I think Neil is right. It's because of the internet, perhaps. Anyway, growing up here, there was always balance between the Estabrook Road access and the Punkatasset access. I'm very familiar with both of them. And I'm pleased to see there's access at Chamberlain Road and at Monument Street Farm, but I don't think those points get the publicity. I don't know where they would get it from, but I feel there's been a terrible undue burden at the end of Estabrook Road. And I feel as a private landowner, Neil Rasmussen has the right to bring a lawsuit. It's not a threat of a lawsuit. I know nothing about it, but I don't like the word threat combined with a private citizen's right to bring a lawsuit to settle an issue regarding their private property. That's my feeling.
Thank you.
Susanna K. Reed, 366 Estabrook. I wasn't expecting to hear that. I was getting up to say there are 17 spaces, speaking to Ms. Kaufman's concern that the access is being restricted, that are never full. Never.
That's great.
Chamberlain, I'm sorry, on Chamberlain. The 17 spaces.
Great.
And Monument Farm has town-owned access, and that has not been utilized. And so the concern that you need to break into more natural land on an old historic road to add parking when the parking is actually not being utilized in other areas strikes me as completely missing the point of an access committee that's supposed to look at everything instead of just focusing on one little road. Thank you.
Thank you.
Candace Nelson, Hayward Mill Road. I would just like to encourage the committee to avoid making permanent decisions tonight when there are so many factors yet to be decided. And I don't know this for sure, but I would assume that the neighbors at Punkatasset are organizing to limit the size of the parking lot that may or may not get put in at on the Apthorpe land. And so if I were one of those neighbors, I'd be saying, oh, there's 10 spaces or 11 spaces at Estabrook. We don't want any more than that on the Apthorpe land. So I could see.
Yes, we already have a petition from.
Is there? Well, I didn't know.
Yes,
I didn't know that, but I'm not surprised. So, all to say, I think that we could be headed down a road of far more restriction than the problem really calls for. And
all right, thank you.
Tonight may not be the night, in my opinion, to make permanent decisions.
Thank you. Something new?
I'm Lisa Pohl again, 75 Laurel Street.
Something new?
I agree with Candace that it's probably not a good night to make a permanent decision. Again, I agree with Mr. Green here. It's, you know, it sets a precedent, you know, about a public road having, you know, being dictated by the residents there. I do not see at all any safety issues on Estabrook Road whatsoever. It is not a narrow road. I don't know. The police commissioner, you know,
Chief of Police.
Chief, is not from, and when I spoke with him, he had never walked Estabrook Roads or woods and had, so, but the road itself is not narrow. It's a dead-end street. If cars are parked on one side, they could be parked along the entire one side of Estabrook Road, and emergency vehicles would be able to get in and out adequately. So that is, in my opinion, not an argument. So I think it would be good to take pause and making a permanent decision.
Something new, Ms. White?
Abby White from 851 Monument Street. I think there is a pressing need to deal with the safety aspect at Monument Street. I can't speak as much to Estabrook. I used to use that access before we lived at Monument Street quite frequently, but it was prior to a lot of this discussion, and it was more settled at that time. But I do think safety is something that needs to come to the forefront of the discussion and decision making. And as far as just insight into the Apthorpe land being used in the future, I don't think there's any guarantees there, but I would ask that any decision making from the town be done very thoughtfully, which I know it will, but with the balancing of what the town historically has used this beautiful multiple patchwork tracts of land owned by private and conservation groups and educational groups. I think that we need to maintain the integrity of what's there, and expecting a conservation group that does have different goals, which we met as a neighborhood with them and got to hear a lot about their intended use, and that they're not really in the business of building parking lots, so this would need to really work for them. So I would just be careful having that be the solution to all of our town access into the Estabrook Woods and Punkatasset cumulatively.
It's not. It's a part of the solution. So it's not the only solution.
Thank you. That's all.
Ms. Bemis, I see you coming to the microphone.
I think maybe Abby may have just covered mostly of what I wanted to say. Ellie Bemis, 858 Monument Street. But I just want to say I don't think this is a NIMBY issue. You know, the concern is for the original intention of the preservation of Estabrook Woods, which began with Harvard's purchase of it as a nature preserve. And the town has reiterated that. If you look at the easement that the town granted to the trustees of reservations, there was a provision on Punkatasset that there could be a parking lot, but it specifically says that that would only happen if it was needed for public safety, and that it will not greatly increase the number of people using Punkatasset, Parcel A, Parcel B, and the Harvard land. Mm-hmm. And the issue is not excluding the public. You know, the public should be allowed to go. It's all about limiting the amount of use, which is both dogs and people. I think the parking has become excessive, and the use of dogs has become excessive and led to all the problems. I don't see any harm in limiting the parking. You can always add more. We can see from right now how hard it is to decrease once you have too much. And I also think that we had a really good neighborhood meeting with the trustees, but their concern is that they're not just providing a parking lot, that it fits with their mission. And I think we, the town, need to be very careful that their mission, just like Abby was saying.
Agreed. I think we've conveyed that to the trustees. Yes, sir.
Sorry to drag this out. I'm trying to be very quick. Peter Shaw, I'm at 280 Estabrook Road. I'm the new resident in the area, but have 20 years of experience with using the woods. Just a point on process. You know, a committee of established and respected members of the community was put together to consider all of these points that are being discussed tonight. Been comments about that committee was somewhat split. This is not a death penalty case. In my experience, 7-2 is not a split of any kind. That's a very convincing decision. And I would simply encourage you to go ahead and make the decision that the committee you put in place to recommend has recommended to you. Otherwise, we could do this forever. We can forever say, yeah, why don't we wait till town meeting? Then why don't we wait till some inspection report? Why don't we wait till another snowmageddon? So my advice is just let's make a decision.
Thank
let's
you.
Get off the pot.
Dutch, are you coming up? Got to move faster.
In response to what he just said, I'm Bonnie Polig. I was on the Estabrook Woods Committee.
Yes, you are.
On Holdenwood Road. I just want to reiterate what I'm sure some of you already know and what Ms. Kaufman was saying. Our decisions were not unanimous, and we were, in fact, threatened. That was a word that came up. We were threatened by the neighbors who said that if we restored any more parking to Estabrook Road, they would permanently shut down access to the woods. So some members were influenced in that, and that affected their votes. So I just want you to know that. Thanks.
Jonathan Cars, 91 Liberty Street. I just want to say I do think a decision should be reached, and I am empathetic for Mr. Lawson and Mr. McCain in their feeling about it.
Thank you. Dutch?
Evening, I'm Dutch Leonard. I'm 267 Main Street. I just heard arguments tonight and throughout this whole discussion that it seems to me there's an overwhelming logic here about the way in which this ought to unfold. So I completely agree with Neil Rasmussen that the issue here is the dogs. It's becoming a dog park. There are dogs running all over the place. There are dogs starting at 6:30 in the morning. They have bells on. They wake up the neighbors. That makes no sense to anyone. So it seems to me the overwhelming logic is restrict the dogs and start by restricting the dogs and see how that goes. So the general principle I would articulate is one of the minimal intervention by government to try to fix this problem, which if the problem is dogs, let's try the things that this committee suggested about how to improve the dog behavior, to reduce the number of dogs that are there, to make them on leashes at the right places and so on. So start with that and see how that goes. And don't make a permanent decision about something else, about how many cars you can afford to have there. If you don't have to make that decision now, wait and see how maybe the dog's problem is going to get a lot better. It's always been a puzzle to me that, the part of the allegation was that the big problem is dogs at 6:30 in the morning. Well, 11 parking places are going to be plenty for the dog walkers who want to be there at 6:30 in the morning. So you're not going to get at that problem by restricting parking. So it just seems to me, unfold this in the right order, we haven't yet tried the restrictions that are designed to work with dogs. Maybe they won't, in which case then you have to do something else, but let's at least try that and see how it goes before you make another permanent decision that conflates these issues.
Terry?
Terry Rothermel, 330 Muscatacud Road. In this case, I do not speak for the trees. I would urge the board to consider the interests of the broad citizens of this town and even beyond in the use of this great resource. Thank you.
Thank you. Something new, Neil?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that we speak as if we're about to put some restrictions on dogs and see if they work. We're not talking about changing anything in any of these recommendations. It's already posted there that dogs are supposed to be on leash. They're not on leash. They're running all over the place. No restriction we've put on, like bagging your dog waste, is going to make any difference. That's already posted there. People don't do it anyway. There's 20,000 dogs a year going in and out of there, pooping, peeing, barking, all these other things. There's nothing going to change by enacting any of the dog rules here. The only rules that would affect dog behavior in Estabrook Woods is leashing in the entire woods or exclusion as they are in a lot of the other properties, Great Meadows, as you know, Audubon properties and so on. Those are the only two things that would actually change the state from where it is today.
Something new?
Yes, one comment about the signs. As far as I know, the last time I checked, and I haven't been there like in the last week or so, Neil has put a sign that is a small green sign with small print on the side that has about leashing dogs, along with a whole bunch of other information. There are no signs where people get out of their cars to say leash dogs. There's no sign when you're coming out of the woods saying
So you
release
disagree?
your dog, et cetera.
We could
So-
do a better job with signage and information.
Right,
I
so
get
we
it.
haven't
Thank you.
actually tested it, because I think what
I
the committee's
take your-
recommending
I
is a
take
lot
your
more than
point.
the sign that's
I
there.
take your point. I take your point. Really, if,
I just concur with Kathy, but
thank
also
you
it's not on the
for
internet
concurring. Yeah, we need new information, not, that's not going to be helpful to us. All right, where are we? I will remind you only that, that the parking restrictions on Estabrook Woods are temporary restrictions put in place by the chief of police for 60 days following, that last for 60 more days from when we received Polly and Sally's report. I don't remember the exact day. So we could do these, we could make this a permanent change, we could make this extend a temporary change, we could do whatever we want there. So I'm going to need somebody to sort of step up and propose, or I'll do it, and see where we are on this. So if I'm understanding the committee, just in terms of where they are, you, Jane, and Alice are not in a position where you would support the, let's call it permanent until we change it, but permanent 212 foot of parking on Estabrook Road. Am I correctly?
I could agree to a permanent parking of 212 feet on Estabrook Road with a condition that that may change if parking restrictions are, parking options at either Apthorpe Land or Monument Street are unable to move forward to allow adequate public access to the land. So I think those 212 feet are great.
I got it. Okay, I would just say that it sort of goes without saying, since
It doesn't go without saying, because once you say that the restrictions are 212 feet as is, every resident along Estabrook Road is going to think that's the end of it. There's no more parking anywhere else beyond the 212 feet.
okay, so
And I
just
think
as a
there's a
matter
condition.
of public information as opposed to regulation is your point, right?
Yeah.
Where would you be on that, Jane?
I agree. I think that I go back to the committee's discussions. I think that the limiting of parking on Estabrook Road, assuming that we can maintain the number of parking spots that that we have identified at Monument, I can support that.
All right.
I can go along with
All
that
right.
friendly amendment.
Okay, so I think it's let me test on you.
Okay.
It's a however statement, right?
A conditional statement.
Conditional
We
statement.
often issue decisions with conditions, and if the other conditions are met or not met, there are
All right,
ways
so
to
why
come
don't you
back.
state for us what you would,
I would, if I could do this on the fly, I would make a
ahead.
I would support the current parking restrictions along 212 feet of Estabrook Road with the condition that should parking decisions not be able to be resolved at either Apthorpe Land or improvements to Monument Street, that the parking restrictions along Estabrook Road be revisited.
I
to allow for adequate public access to the woods.
Okay, Mr. Town Manager, are you writing it down?
I mean, does that sound reasonable to you as a condition? I'm sorry. To allow adequate public access to the woods.
No, there was something being either repealed or revisited.
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 Revisited. And the last one was period.
That was, he added it.
All right, well, I would prefer that we just move on with this, but I understand that. So, Chris, did you write it down? Could you restate it for us?
That she could support the current 212 feet of parking along Estabrook, on one side of Estabrook Road. However, should improvements at the Apthorpe land or on Monument Street not be feasible, then this would be revisited in order to allow adequate public access to the Estabrook Woods.
That would be a good summary.
All right, is that a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. With respect to 4D1, I would prefer to indicate our intent to support this, but indicate also that we would prefer to have it stated in feet and have it, the number of spots sort of recalibrated based on information from the committee or from the town
engineer,
rather than say 13 spots, because I think we'll get in trouble if we do that. So D1, I don't know how you determine a parking lot size. I don't know if you can do that in feet. You sort of, I think you think about how many vehicles, and I wouldn't limit it to cars.
This is along Monument
Oh, this is about,
Street. This is if the
okay.
Apthorpe.
So I would do that in feet if it's along, I'm sorry, I read that as, if the parking cannot be built along Apthorpe, okay. I would again do linear feet along
Okay, so
Monument Street.
Perhaps then we could ask the town manager if we can get, I can investigate the committee findings to see if we have it and review it with you and the town engineers and come back with a revised statement here for our adoption at our next meeting with feet or something more specific in here.
There must be a standard.
Well, we heard.
I think we heard one from Mr. Rasmussen.
Peter Siebert, Hayward Mill Road. I was a member of the Access Committee. The nature of the parking along Monument Street does not lend itself to a strict end-to-end linear footage because there are a number of curb cuts, stones, trees, other impediments that really make it impossible to say you can park along this whole space. So it would be advisable to look at what's there, which we did, and unfortunately the circumstances changed while we were in the process of looking at it, and come up with a target number of spaces.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think the
considerably less than 13 as it now stands without some other modification along that.
I think the principle is quite clear. I just think that's too uncertain without some additional language in there that would be guidance, because we now have curb cuts and.
Well, then you have to get really specific, I think, because one curb cut takes 8 feet, but you can't just say, well, that's only 8 feet taken away from that linear footage because there's a little space on either side.
I think the recommendation is to adopt the principle associated with this and to defer actual action on it until we've got some more information that could perhaps provide more detail.
Defer, then you don't have to decide anything.
I'm sorry?
I say if you defer, then you don't have to make any specific commitment.
Just a clarification on that. The problem in Monument Street is because it's split up, assigning a linear foot to it doesn't help, because if you have 212 linear feet, but they're all separate from each other, you can't park any cars there. And it's very divided up, and there's fire hydrants, mailboxes without clarification of how much clearance is allowed around them. And what happened in the engineering department was they also were looking at road shoulder as a width issue. like how deep is the shoulder off the road? And if you try and take a piece of road shoulder where you could actually take the car off the road, there's only like 3 spaces at Monument Street, because some of the spaces, that even the ones we counted to get the 13, are only really like 3 or 4 feet wide as far as getting off the road until you go down the hill further toward the Churchill property down the street. So it's a very complicated thing. I think the thing to do is name the number of cars and then use a police standard and the engineering department standard to try and accommodate those with however many linear feet they need.
Was there any documentation that you used to come up with the number 13, though, in terms of how you allocated?
Yeah. What we did 2 things. The engineering department made some measurements and determined that a lot of the shoulder is too narrow. Mm-hmm. So they came up with some numbers that didn't really jive with how many cars actually parked there. So we went and actually measured where the physical cars were parking. And we measured the lengths, the uninterrupted spaces where cars parked, divided those by 19 feet throughout the remainder, and added all those numbers up.
But I think if that could be provided to the town, that's really what we're talking about.
Right. It's tough, though, because, yeah. So anyway, just to clarify, put the number of cars there and then let them figure it out.
Yep.
Okay.
In looking at all of the information, there's the number of parking spaces. There's also the ability to get in and out of those parking spaces, which would greatly change if the cars came off the road. We all know that. So that would be a win-win, I think.
Well, that's why the statement in here says the NRC would work with town public safety staff and neighbors to provide safer parking for.
Safer, right. I want to point out the apex in the road as a hazard, whether there's a parking lot there or whether it's a curve that people park along. As Neil said, the parking is both 13 cars, 10 cars, 8, however many you count. Several of them are are half on the road and half not. If there were a parking lot there, you would still be coming in and out at a very, I'm sure the engineering department will look at this. My point is that historically it's worked because cars have driven slower, society has been calmer. There's a 30-mile-an-hour zone on Monument Street, but really it's driven at least 40 by most people. So that should all be taken into consideration with whatever is done at Monument Street.
I think that the entire board has been clear on safety being one of the driving concerns of all of this.
Even if it goes forward into being then handed to another group to make a decision on number of parking, the town will still have a voice in that.
I don't think it'll be I hope it will not be a unilateral decision about the number of parking spots that would be.
I'm just concerned about where this is going. I do trust this process, but then if it goes to in another direction with a process that we don't have as much control of as a town, I just want to consider what decisions are made here to set that up.
Too. We've raised those issues with the trustees. I understand it. We'll work very hard to ensure that we arrive at a solution that's satisfactory to the town.
Thank you. I have small children. I'm a mother with, that is where my concern comes from. The mother bear. Thank you.
Got it. All right, so with respect to 4D1, then essentially we're asking the town to come back to us with a more definitive statement about parking, but in principle, this is something we support, yes?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And then we may be able to take action on E, which is that the NRC undertake due diligence and consult with the neighbors to accommodate roadside parking for 3 to 5 cars on the town frontage of Monument Road. And is that something that we could turn into a motion? And
I'm just curious, what is the current parking on Monument Farm Road?
I don't think there
is parking.
You can pull off the road, but there's no parking.
Right.
I mean,
there's a pull-off. I pulled off and
I
parked.
pulled off the road.
No, there's no pull-off on Monument Farm Road. There's no visible place anybody ever parks there.
I disagree.
There's a trail. There's 2 trail accesses, but there, if you can't. There's no signage, no posting that the trail accesses are for the public. So it's every time we visited there, we never saw a vehicle.
Well, I think the intent here is quite clear, and that is to make something visible. and obvious to somebody who wanted to access the woods from that area.
Right.
Right, so, can I get a motion to that effect?
I can see that one. I agree with that one.
Yes.
So, I move, somebody move.
I move that the Natural Resources Commission undertake due diligence and consult with neighbors to accommodate roadside parking for 3 to 5 cars on the town's frontage on Monument Farm Road.
Second.
And add a single parking sign.
Yeah.
Conservation land parking. Yep.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. All right. I would like to turn our attention, if I could, to recommendation paragraph section 9. And this is, I'll read it. The committee recommends that the town convene an initial meeting of conservation organizations, landholders, members of the public, other stakeholders, with the purpose of creating or reconstituting an ongoing formal or informal group to meet as needed in order to, and then a set of conditions about monitoring and advising. And I think this is a good idea.
It's a fine idea.
If
I think there was unanimity by the committee that this clearly made sense going forward, as said here. And the question would be whether it was, as you stated early, an access advisory committee, and therefore I would read that to be an access committee, advisory committee to a Concord. Is this a Concord only, or is this something that is more about access advisory committee to the Estabrook Woods as a whole? And that's an important.
It sounds like that what we're looking at is a stewardship committee, not an
Right.
access committee.
Right.
And
I think that captures the spirit.
I'm a little bit concerned about the notion of an informal group.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure what an informal group.
Well, and also, I think that's correct. I'm also, the woods is not the town's woods, so I'm not sure what a stewardship committee about the woods would. So I think we would have to have access in the sort of title of the committee, rather than just I like the idea of a stewardship, but the woods is ours to. So what I would suggest we do here is, Jane, you have been the liaison to this committee, and we're grateful for all the hard work you did. So since you did some hard work, I see no reason not to give you some more to do. So ask you if you would be good enough to take the lead in developing a charge for the committee that we could come back and, using the information that's provided here, you raised the issue of, without being specific, but specifically, should Carlisle be
Right.
included?
And I'd want advice to that point, because that's a.
So you might consult with people, but come back with a point of
Yep.
view, and we can figure it out and come up with some clever name.
Whose woods these are.
But I think the principle is one that we would certainly
Yeah.
adopt here, that having some kind of
Some sort.
ongoing committee, and it wouldn't be a citizen committee, it would be a committee that the board created. It could report to NRC. I mean, we've got a steward, Kathy, you're on, aren't you on
Conservation.
Conservation Stewardship Committee? We got Trails Committee that all meet as part of the NRC, so maybe we would.
White
think
Pond
about-
Committee reports to the Select Board, I believe.
Hmm?
I believe the White Pond Committee reports to the Select Board.
And the Junction, West Concord, didn't it?
Right. I mean, that we have precedent of committees within Concord that report to committees or report directly to the Select Board.
Okay, so is it clear then that we'll ask Jane to do that and then come back to us with a recommendation for doing that? Right, thank you. Item number 10, these were a set of issues that the committee discussed and decided were recommendations were not warranted at this time. And I just simply want to have you confirm, in fact, that we don't want to take any action on any of these items for the public that doesn't have its parking by permit only, resident-only parking, requiring leashes throughout Estabrook Woods on weekends and holidays, requiring leashes throughout Estabrook Woods at all times, allow dogs to enter the woods only at certain access points, and prohibit dogs in the Estabrook Woods entirely. Those were things that the committee decided not to go forward on, and I would want to get your confirmation that we don't want to take.
I would agree. I think these are perhaps necessary in the future if it comes to that, but not necessary at this time.
I would agree.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Does that seem like a reasonable?
Sounds like we agree with number 10 as written.
Number 10 is written. I don't think we need to adopt it. I think we just need to indicate that we're not going to do that. All right.
I mean, I'm glad they were discussed.
Yeah, no, absolutely, very important.
Issues that should have been discussed, but I'm also glad that they were not recommended.
All right, the last set of articles here are items 5, 6, 7, and 8, and each of these items refers to a particular access point. So item number 5 is recommendations with respect to Chamberlain Woods on Lowell Road. And what it lists is a number of activities that should be undertaken in support of making that the best use and access to the woods along there. And to me personally, these are all fine recommendations, and I think we should adopt them. But I'm willing to hear from anybody if there's a...
Including clouds.
All right, then.
Yeah, this looks...
All right, then I would entertain a motion to adopt the recommendations contained in Section 5 of the committee report.
So moved.
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The same is true for Estabrook Road. It has to do with, making sure that the parking is graded appropriately to deal with some of the boulders there, to work with the abutters, to think about, doesn't require anything, but to think about a particular kind of fencing that might be helpful to this. So I would, again, encourage us to adopt those recommendations and to begin work with the affected parties to see how these might play out.
Yep. They seem reasonable, too.
Those are a
Yep.
motion to approve recommendation 6.
Yes. So moved. Recommendations, number 6, specific recommendations for Estabrook Road.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
The only question I have is the signage, is there going to be some uniformity, and is that a responsibility that the town will have?
Well, I think that's something we have to work out. There's some signage already on the access road past the end of the road. We have to, I think, work with folks there and see if we can come up. They don't have signage all over the place down there. So I think we can work toward that. 7 is a recommendation with respect to Punkatassett. And essentially it talks about dealing with the parking that's there now to make sure it's as safe as possible, and I would entertain a motion to approve that recommendation in section 7 of the report.
So moved.
Aye.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Oh, wait, all right.
So I think that's good.
And number 8 is Monument Farm. And similarly, although I can't find, here it is. Similarly, Section 8 deals with essentially signage, and we're having the NRC work as was contained in the earlier statement about Monument Farm. So again, I would entertain a motion to adopt the recommendations contained in Section 8 of the report.
Point of clarification on that. Number 8B is moot because...
I'm sorry?
Number 8B is moot because the NRC already did it.
Oh.
Okay.
Then we'll just moot it right out.
So NRC added a sign to identify conservation land and trail markings?
Good. Jeff? Okay.
All right.
Oh, Delia.
Thank you.
Deal.
So as amended, we would adopt the recommendation,
So moved.
Section 8. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. Coming back to the last section, but section 1, but it really is a lot of parts of sections because it has to do with signing and education. Okay? And I think I would suggest that we talk to Delia about this, who manages the website, to see if we could effect the appropriate changes here to get the website to be more explicit in talking to the public about it. Does that seem like a reasonable approach? All right, and is there any reason why we couldn't go forward to adopt section 1 about education?
No, that seems reasonable. Who does this? Is this the responsibility of the NRC or the new committee?
Well, there's section A of the paragraph
The town
1 talks
work
to
with
do working with
landowners.
landowners and whether it's the trustees, whether it's the Conservation Land Trust, whether it's the neighbors are to work together to come up with these solutions.
And I think that I think what Alice is getting at is consistency between all of the different points.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's...
So this would be asking the town to do the work on public outreach and education, which sometimes we ask for input from a citizen group, which might be the one that's being formed, is my only question about this. Signs, I think, are just reasonable for NRC and others in town to work with landowners.
And then part B is about the website, and I think we...
That's the town, I think.
Well, I think we could also, the trustees have a website, and Land Trust has a website.
Mm-hmm. But I could also see there being some additional work in identifying the other sources that have advertised the area as a dog park and help change the language in those places as well to reflect that, honoring our woods.
That's a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so if we adopt this, I think we're pretty clear about what we want to intend. So is there a motion to adopt?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. And that concludes our discussion of that item on the agenda. Let me conclude by...
Item 3.
Whoops. No, item 3 is it's resolving the legal issue. The town is talking to the abutters about trying to work out an arrangement without violating anybody's legal claims. And the second was working with the trustees on the up plan. And I think those are underway.
Okay.
And we can report back here when we have progress
Okay.
on it. So let me conclude by thanking all of you that came tonight to contribute to our conversation. To all the folks who wrote to us or called us, I greatly appreciate it. And again, our special thanks to Sally and Polly and your committee for all the hard work you all did to help us move this issue forward. So thank you all very, very much. And we'll move on to the review of town warrant articles. So please feel free to stay because, this will be...
This is the exciting part.
This will be an exciting time. Madam Moderator.
Chocolate break?
Do you want to just pull a chair up and sit at the table with us? I don't...
Here, you can take this one.
Here's a microphone, so just grab a chair. Okay.
That's great, thank you.
All right, so let me just put this in context as we begin this discussion. We'll be talking about the warrant tonight. We have a meeting scheduled with the moderator who, for the record, has joined us at the table on Thursday at 4:30. Is that when it is?
Is it Wednesday?
Wednesday
Wednesday
at
at
4:30
4:30 here?
Yes.
We'll meet in the select board room. And then we have a select board meeting, a special session Thursday at 6:30. And it'll be at that, right?
To finalize the warrant on
To finalize
Thursday.
the warrant article. Tonight, our obligation is to begin to
Set the order of
set the
articles.
order. And do we have to formally accept the warrants that have been submitted?
The petition articles, no,
No,
because
I
you're
don't mean the
required.
petition
But if
articles.
there are any articles that you have concerns about or would prefer not to include, we can,
No,
we
it's-
can
for
discuss
me,
this.
the question is, do we need to take affirmative action?
No.
We don't. We need to take exception. Okay.
Exactly.
All right. Yes, I would too. All right, so where are we? Madam Moderator, do you have a perspective that you want to share with us?
Well, thanks for giving me the opportunity to look at the proposed order of the warrant. I am glad to see that the citizen petition articles are kind of sprinkled through the warrant, which makes sense to me. There's not an obvious place to put all of these, but I do think that there's a certain thematic consistency with where the various citizen petition articles have been positioned. So those, I would have no quarrel with that. It's been a perennial struggle where to put the zoning articles. I think the board in the past several years has tried not to put them at the end of the warrant on the theory that they are often less scintillating in the view of the general public than some of the other issues, and they may not stick around for the discussion of the zoning articles, which in fact arguably have a greater impact on their lives in town than many of the other articles do. I see that they're all largely at the end this year. Actually, they are not. They're in the middle.
They're in the 30s.
They're in the middle. I was missing a page, yes. So they're sandwiched between lots of other things, some of which are citizen petition articles that I think are likely to be of interest to folks, so they will stay for those. So that's a good thing.
Okay, I am searching. Mr. Ng could not be here this evening. He was detained at work, obviously, missing him. And you had comments.
Right. As I said, this is sort of the first experience I've had in trying to order them. But I guess my questions had to do with the petitions, whether to spread them out was the best way to do it. I can see why some of the made sense depending upon who the sort of the area that was going to have the public hearing or review of them. But it also, something like the reducing the influence of money in politics, number 19, I didn't quite see that fitting into any logical way, and I just.
Who's the line?
It's a wonderful moment of irony.
I think it should be left there. Then.
Yeah, I think it highlights
a little
it.
levity at town meeting.
Maybe that's very important, I think, probably. So.
There's a paper bag.
People are concerns about whether these are in the right position for the citizen articles. Now, that was one that was an odd justification. No reason not to put it there. Article number 30, I would argue, could be before we hear any of the CPA recommendations, because the CPA often deals with public lands. Slightly different, but it may help guide some of the decisions and thinking along the CPC investments.
So a specific recommendation is what?
Number 30 be moved to under 27. So number 30.
Guideline for preservation.
No,
Okay.
I must have gotten I have an older draft, it looks like.
You're only the chair. Why do you need a better draft?
30 is the petition for preservation of public access, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so
We
it's,
move that to 27, before 27.
To below 27.
So we're,
Before we start talking about CPA appropriations,
okay.
because CPA often invests in public lands. It may inform some of the discussion that we might have. But I don't know. I can see it going the other way.
So it would come right behind the,
After 27 and before 28. It's a recommendation. Depends how deep in conversation we get on the CPC.
okay, does that seem reasonable to you, Madam Moderator?
It does, yes. I think that Alice is right. We deal with open space issues and recreation issues as part of the Community Preservation Act allocations. So thematically, it makes sense there as well. I can see it making sense where it is because we have the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail grant of easement, as well as the easements for the Brookside Square development, all of which are kind of public access issues. But it makes sense the other way as well.
All right, so let's make that move then. That's all right. Other concerns? Chris, did you have any that?
I'll just mention it's a little out of the ordinary that we normally go from the town, ask the town to consider the town budget, then go right to the school budget, then the regional school budget. Laurel has put in a couple of what she thought would be relatively straightforward capital projects before the school budget, so that's a change from prior years. I don't know if you have an opinion on that.
Is that the public safety, the fire engines? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
are we anticipating those changing given the fire?
No. Well, we're hoping that the Station 2 is repaired with insurance proceeds.
I guess if I may, would share Chris's concern if we thought there was any risk that the schools would not all be taken care of on the first night of town meeting. It would be nice to be able to get through Article 18. But let's remember that we will be dealing with the consent calendar as well. That will take us a little bit of time on the first night of town meeting. Some of these items could end up on the consent calendar. I think in prior years, some of the personnel board issues have ended up on the consent calendar, so that might give us a little more breathing space. I would be surprised if, we'll find out at the hearings, but I would be surprised if there was a lengthy discussion about replacing a fire engine in an ambulance. So I don't think, given this order of articles, that I would worry too much about not being able to reach all the school articles on the first night of town meeting.
Okay.
And that would be my only concern about inserting those additional articles.
All right, then we'll leave those the way they are then, is that?
I'm fine with that. It's your decision, and it's...
You also have a lot of experience.
There is an argument for people seeing some of the significant town expenditures kind of all together.
Yeah, no, I would prefer them be this way, but,
Yes.
and I'm perhaps not quite as concerned about getting through all the school articles in one fell swoop. I mean,
I understand it's really an issue of comedy because you ask a lot of people who are staff to come and be out for the evening, and it would be too bad if we had to ask them to be out 2 evenings, but...
yeah, but on the other hand...
On the other hand.
All right, so we'll leave those in place. Other concerns, Chris?
Just note that Articles 50 through 56, the last 6 or 7 articles, are likely to be on the consent agenda. So that would put those 2 citizen petitions toward the end there, plus the energy goals, as perhaps the last matters of business on the last night, where the crowd might thin out.
Good, very good observation.
I would say that is a good observation, and
Something's got to be last. so.
something has to be last. You might, well, I'm mindful of the disaster that the dog bylaw met being last on the town meeting warrant in the year that it came up. So I hesitate to say if you were to put the tree preservation articles last, they would hold a lot of interest and would keep people there, but you'd hate to see them suffer the same fate as the dog bylaw.
I thought the honeybees should be last.
Is there an average number of articles we can get through in a night? I guess some nights we've only gotten as far as 2 or 3 articles, depending on debate, so.
It really does depend.
But it's usually not the first night. Usually that moves along at a pretty good clip.
Yeah.
Well, I do remember our last moderator, Eric Van Loon, observing that every annual town meeting seemed to take 12 hours.
Right.
Yeah.
So no matter how you break it up.
12 hours.
Is article number 39 still necessary given the state implementation of a 6-month moratorium?
That's the marijuana
The marijuana legislation? Are you familiar enough with that?
moratorium.
Okay. I just remember reading a headline.
The planning board put the moratorium forward to gauge the discussion that was going to take place in the next 3 months, just in case it was necessary. They may not move it, but and with the conversation that's going on with the changes in the legislation and discussion about timing, it may not be a consideration. But they're trying to be cautious, not knowing when certain things are going to take place and when the next town meeting was going to be, and so we're erring on the side of caution.
Okay.
So that state action was a 6-month delay, though, was it not? And the moratorium was a year.
18 months.
18 months.
Yeah.
So I think we likely need to keep it in here. It may turn out that they don't want to move it, but
But we won't know.
other concerns or questions? We haven't resolved that last question that was raised about, the last articles.
The ending.
Something has to be last.
Is there guidance or precedence from former town meetings, previous town meetings, of a way that you can recall? I can't, but
Yeah, no, what I recall is struggling every year with what is going to be last, and trying to sprinkle things that would be of interest to people to encourage them to stay, through the things that might be of less interest. And honestly, I think that I would expect the energy goals to be of interest to folks, and for them to stay for that discussion. And if some of these other enterprise fund articles end up on the consent calendar, that would leave that discussion at the end. We never have any unpaid bills. And that would leave those 2 things to be last. You might, well...
should we even think about making energy last?
Could think about that.
Putting honeybees somewhere else.
Switching the order of honeybees versus energy.
Because I think it will command some attention. And it's a funding article too, isn't it?
Yes.
It is.
Yeah.
But I think it's $25,000?
No.
Oh, it's $200,000.
$200,000 for a consultant and in a position. Well, I think we would be better served to have something like that at the end rather than the petitioners. That seems kind of unfair to the petitioner.
So you're thinking the energy goals might go as Article 49 and...
Yeah, I'd just switch 48,
just switch
49.
those 2.
Does that seem reasonable to you?
Seems reasonable to me.
Chris?
Yes.
Okay. What else? Right, so let me ask then, when we meet on Wednesday, Town council, please.
Just note that Laurel had, on the public hearing, which public hearing each of these articles is going to be heard at, Laurel had some questions for you, such as 20, the money in the citizen petition on money in politics. Would that be heard at the FinCom hearing or the Select Board hearing? Since it's not an appropriation of town funds,
I don't
it
think
would
it's
be.
finance, I think
So it'd
it's
be-
ours.
So it'd be Select Board.
I think it's
And
ours.
then, so she's had several places in that column where she has questions for you.
Brookside Square.
What's the question? Why wouldn't they be select board matters?
Yep, versus planning board, but it seems like Select Board would be the right way for both.
Do they need to go to the
for
planning board for
31 and
approval?
32,
They don't, do
the rail trail easement and the Brookside Square easement should be Select Board.
How about the senior means?
While you're there at Article 32, I believe that Article 33 will be a 2/3 vote. It was at special town meeting.
Oh, Article 33 is 2/3?
Yeah, both. Article
Okay,
30.
thank you. Great, and then the tree preservation bylaw, it's a general bylaw, but proposed by the planning board. Her question was, should it be at the planning board hearing? Or the select board hearing? The revolving fund, she's showing as the FinCom hearing. So,
So the preservation bylaw, wasn't the committee reporting to the planning board?
yes.
It's a planning board.
So it's planning board.
planning
It's a
board
planning
initiative.
board article.
Right, wouldn't it be a planning board article?
It's not a zoning article, so it'd be a general.
General bylaw. But I think similar to things that the Board of Health might have proposed at different times, those things were heard by the Board of Health. So it's wherever you want to put it.
Would your recommendation be the select board?
Well, my recommendation would be the planning board.
Right.
Since they're all
I mean, that would have been my first suggestion, but it
These are
sounded
both
like you were
PDs.
thinking it goes to the select board. How would you
Well, the
plan it?
revolving expenditure, the tree preservation revolving fund, I agree with you. That should be at the planning board hearing.
Not the revolving fund.
The revolving fund should be with the Finance Committee.
I misspoke. Yeah, I meant it the other way around. The bylaw should be at the planning board.
Yep.
And the revolving fund should be at,
FinCom.
yeah, it's two separate.
They come right after.
Well, but
Yeah.
I mean, the question is, that's the way they wanted them presented, so that they could be dealt with.
Which hearings? And the practice is, if it involves the expenditure of funds, it goes to the Finance Committee. Yep.
Yeah, if it was a single warrant article, you'd own it, because it would have included a financing arm, but because the warrants articles are split.
So in that same vein, where would you put energy goals? Because that's a $200,000 expenditure. Right now it's listed under select board.
And it should be Finance Committee.
Yeah, Finance Committee. That doesn't mean that we aren't going to take an active position on it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just making, it's shown here as select board. so
Yeah.
I'm
With a
just
question
making
mark.
that-
And neonicotinoids, perhaps the other way, although does the petition ask for the expenditure of funds? I
It's
think it
money.
does, so it's money.
Yeah.
So that's Finance Committee also. And that, yeah, we missed the adopt fees for affordable housing. So that's also a collection of funding, so it seems like that should be the Finance Committee.
That's Article 47.
Finance Committee hearing.
But the
Article
means test,
47.
the means before 46, Chris, does that need to go to the Finance Committee? This is sort of ratification
Of the legislation?
of the legislation as opposed to a new
Initiative.
financial initiative. So I think that could come to the select board.
Sort of like the split on the tree with the planning board.
Sorry, what do you think,
So you
Linda?
think that's select board?
For the home rule petition? Yeah, I think so, because
Senior
it's,
means property test.
yeah, 46. I would think that could come to the select board. That's a ratification of a legislative action that then further requires a town vote.
Okay.
Okay.
So it's not there's no new finances at risk with this one. That's already been approved by the town.
Okay.
Great.
Does that cover all of Laurel's questions?
It did. And one additional one related to the text of an article, which was the regional school committee's request for funding of the landfill cap. And last year when it was proposed, but action was deferred, it was defeated at town meeting. The motion, or the article specifically said subject to a Proposition 2.5 override, so that Tony asked that text be put right in there because it's not in our capital plans, and that's how we deal with regional school committee requests that are outside of the levy limit, or outside of the assessment process. So Tony's not here. Laurel reminded us of that. Kerry LaFleur, the new finance director, agrees that it makes sense, but it's sort of your call whether to include that. That was John Flaherty was okay with it. Laurel spoke with John Flaherty.
Run that by me again. Why is that? Why would we do it that way?
Otherwise, you'd have to find it within the levy.
It's a capital
the Concord share, and it's not. It is a capital expenditure, but it's not within the capital plan.
It couldn't be considered excluded debt?
If you make it subject to a proposition and debt exclusion. Did I say override? It would be a debt exclusion vote, a proposition to a debt exclusion. Not an override, but a debt exclusion. Yes.
Okay. Right. So I was trying to.
That was my.
Sorry about that, and that's what I said.
Sorry, excluding
debt. But so it's a ballot question as opposed to straight taking out of free cash.
Right. Yep.
Okay.
And you've checked with Flaherty about that?
And he would be okay with that.
Okay. All right.
That
will make that a 2/3 vote, right?
Yeah. That's right.
Have we heard anything more, Linda, from the Minuteman? I mean, have they coughed up their operating budget, so to speak? But they haven't come.
599.
But they haven't come before you.
But they gave us an updated figure last week.
Okay. All right, so then, is there other, so then at our meeting at 4:30 on Wednesday?
With the moderator and town council.
With town council, we'll just be reviewing
the text of each
text of each of the articles, right? Including the petition articles?
Yes, although we don't make changes in the petition articles. We're not.
We don't make any changes, but we might have a conversation with the citizen petitioners if changes would appear to be in order.
All right, and then we will be back at 6:30 on Thursday to essentially adopt the warrant. And when will it then go to press?
About a week following. Then she'll draft, put it in its final form, and
okay.
I'll go to the printer a week from now. Great.
You got the person or the organization's going to do the printing? I saw that went out.
That's all set up. All right, thank you, Madam Moderator. We'll see you Wednesday.
Thank you. Lovely to see
Good
you
to see you
all.
again.
Lovely to see you.
Please help yourself to some.
Are there any additional public comments? Okay, committee liaison reports.
I met actually earlier tonight with the Council on Aging, and they had a very lively discussion regarding funding for hope of a new van at some point, and other discussions regarding sort of their planning for next year. The Board of Assessors, let's see, which was the other one? One of the others met. The Board of Assessors met on the 5th. They reviewed the Verizon Appellate Tax Board result and had a public forum for the property taxes and a senior tax relief discussion. Bruce Friedman Rail Trail Advisory Committee met on the 5th. They updated discussion on phases 2A, B, and C. discuss the easement approval of the special town meeting, and they are preparing articles for the Concord Journal to educate and get people up to speed about what's going to be going on in the Bruce Friedman Rail Trail, and discuss kind of future issues regarding connections with other trails, the use of it for transportation as well as recreational use, and how they could encourage that, the issue of access. And there was a gift of some funds for a historic marker on Commonwealth Row, and they were marker they would put up. And the Public-Private Partnership Committee, they submitted their final report, and they are now in the process of getting the copies of all the minutes of their meetings so that those can go on the website.
And we have them on our agenda on the 23rd, too. So, good. Good. Thank you, Jane.
My committees are coming up this week.
So I think our only comment of note is on the Minuteman School Building Committee. Gil Bain has been hired as the representative, the owner's representative for the project. And the big news of this is that they believe, according to the recommended schedule, that they will be able to complete construction a year early with a savings of $6.5 million.
Wow.
Well,
So this projects a number of key changes to the design that are cost-effective without impacting learning. I don't know, it sounds like it's all going to move forward. Changes to the heating system that will show $200,000 in savings for radiant heating on the floors. So I think that even if half of these are true, it's, $1 million here and $1 million there add up pretty quickly.
Oh,
That's
good.
great. It's
We'll
nice to
take
hear
it.
about a school building
Yeah.
coming in.
Well, our high school came in on time and on
Yeah.
budget, too.
So it's definitely
Good.
looking like on time and on budget, if not under budget and under
That's
time.
great. All right. I have nothing to report, so we'll move now to miscellaneous correspondence. It's there in the binders, hardly miscellaneous, but lots of correspondence. So committee
Feel free.
appointments. Committee appointments. Jane?
Okay, I will move to approve Mia Glenn of 388 Lowell Road as a full member and Kate Turner of 888 Sudbury Road as an associate member to the Historic Districts Commission representing the Concord Museum for terms expiring January 1, 2022.
Holy mackerel. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Town manager appointment.
Appointments to the Comprehensive Sustainable Energy Committee are by the town manager, subject to the approval of the select board. So I respectfully request the board's confirmation of the appointment of Eric Reinhardt of 9 Haywood Mill Circle to the Comprehensive Sustainable Energy Committee for a term to expire May 31st, 2019.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Annual report photo, what are we're not going to, he's not here.
So we need a photo of us.
Is he going to be available on Thursday?
I haven't heard from him. I'll check with him, but let's plan it shouldn't take us too much time.
No, 5 minutes, everything.
We have
So,
photos from our,
okay, so let's come prepared to have our pictures taken Thursday, assuming Steve's going to show.
were we all there for the perambulation?
I don't know if we had a group pic, no, Tom
we didn't.
wasn't
Oh, Tom
able
was
to be
there.
there for the
We'll
perambulation.
Photoshop them.
All right, so we will adjourn our regular meeting after we've approved the town warrant and have our picture taken, okay?
Yeah, okay.
All right, so I'd like to motion now to adjourn to executive session for the purposes of discussing ongoing litigation, not to return to open session.
So moved.
Second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all very much for this evening.
This one doesn't go up.